Hey guys, my name is Brandon, and today in this video series we're going to be going over the October 2017 released SAT. This is also known as the SAT's official practice test number 9. So I'll be doing the reading section, so yeah, let's just get started. So the first passage is the literature passage. This passage is adapted from Amy Tan, The Bone Setter's Daughter, 2001 by Amy Tan. At last, old widow Lau was done haggling with the driver, and we stepped inside father's shop. It was a north-facing, quite dim inside. And perhaps this was why father did not see us at first. He was busy with a customer, a man who was distinguished looking, like the scholars of 2 decades before. So here in the beginning, the narrator is entering this sort of dimly lit, shop that, which we can infer that her father owns. The two men were bent over a glass case, discussing the different qualities of ink sticks. So maybe this is an ink stick shop. Big Uncle welcomed us and invited us to be seated. From his formal tone, I knew he did not recognize who we were, so I called his name in a shy voice. And he squinted at me, then laughed and announced our arrival to Little Uncle, who apologized many times for not rushing over sooner to greet us. They rushed us to be seated at one of 2 tea tables for customers. Old widow Lau refused their invitation 3 times, exclaiming that my father and uncles must be too busy for visitors. She made weak efforts to leave. So here, old widow Lau and the narrator have entered, their family's supposed ink stick shop, and they're seated by one of the narrator's uncles at one of the tea tables that are usually for customers. And old widow Lau, she's trying to, be polite. She's trying to refuse their invitation, but she made weak efforts to leave, which kind of shows that she really didn't want to leave, but she was really just refusing their invitation to be polite. On the 4th insistence, we finally sat, so they finally sit down at the tea table. Then little uncle brought us hot tea and sweet oranges, as well as bamboo latticework fans with which to cool ourselves. I tried to notice everything so I could later tell Gowling what I had seen. So maybe Gowling is a friend, and the narrator is looking around at her surroundings and maybe remembering them so that she can maybe show off to her friends later and tease out her envy. The floors of the shop were of dark wood, polished and clean, no dirty footprints, even though this was during the dustiest part of the summer. So we can already see from the narrator's observation of surroundings that her family pays a lot of attention to detail. Maybe they value their ink sticks a lot because the shop is very clean. Despite it being the dustiest part of summer, there's no dirty footprints, no dust in the shop. And along the walls were display cases made of wood and glass. The glass was very shiny and not one pane was broken. So again, we see this attention to detail. Within those glass cases were our silk-wrapped boxes, all our hard work. They looked so much nicer than they had in the ink-making studio at Immortal Heart Village. So maybe this was like a previous location of their shop or something, because the narrator is saying, their products are looking so much better in this shop than they looked previously. I saw that father had opened several of the boxes. He set sticks and cakes and other shapes on a silk cloth covering a glass case that served as a table on which he and the customer leaned. First he pointed to a stick with a top shaped like a ferry boat and said with graceful importance, "Your writing will flow as smoothly as a keel cutting through a glassy lake." He picked up a bird shape. "Your mind will soar into the clouds of higher thought." He waved toward a row of ink cakes embellished with designs of peonies and bamboo. "Your ledgers will blossom into abundance while bamboo surrounds your quiet mind." So here, while the narrator's father is, sort of advertising, their writing products to a customer, he is giving some, fictional qualities to the ink. So maybe we can infer from this that her family really thinks that the ink or whatever they're selling is extremely important, and that it gives, the writer different qualities other than beyond what a normal pen or what a normal brush would give. As he said this, precious auntie came back into mind. I was remembering how she taught me that everything, even ink, had a purpose and a meaning. Good ink cannot be the quick kind, ready to pour out of a bottle. You can never be an artist if your work comes without effort. So sort of as the narrator's listening, she sort of remembers something that her aunt told her. And this sort of lesson that her aunt taught her was the fact that if you don't put effort into your work, you can never produce good results. That is the problem with modern ink from a bottle. You do not have to think. You simply write what is swimming on top of your brain. And the top is nothing but pond scum, dead leaves, and mosquito spawn. So similar to the top of the pond, which is, dead leaves, mosquito spawn, stuff like that. The ideas at the top of your mind, if you just, spit them out and write them on paper and they're not refined, then they're really sort of useless. At least that's what the aunt taught the narrator. But when you push an ink stick along an inkstone, you take the first step to cleansing your mind and your heart. You push and ask yourself, what are my intentions? What is in my heart that matches my mind? So basically here, the aunt or the narrator is remembering what her aunt said. Her aunt said that if you, push yourself, if you put in the effort, if you really, ask yourselves these questions and question your intentions, only after you put in that work, only after you put in that much effort, then will your writing be something worthwhile and something good. I remembered this, and yet that day in the ink shop, I listened to what Father was saying, and his word became far more important than anything precious Auntie had thought. Look here, Father said to his customer, and I looked. He held up an ink stick and rotated it in the light. See, it's the right hue, purple-black, not brown or gray like the cheap brands you might find down the street. And listen to this. And I heard a sound as clean and pure as a small silver bell. The high-pitched tone tells you that the suit is very fine, as smooth as the sliding banks of old rivers. And the scent, can you smell the balance of strength and delicacy, the musical notes of the ink's perfume? Expensive, and everyone who sees you using it will know that it was well worth the high price. I was very proud to hear Father speak of our family's ink this way. So essentially, in hearing what the narrator's father is telling to this customer, the narrator comes to really appreciate her family's work, her family's ink, the heritage that their ink carries at the end, because she says she's very proud to hear her father speak about her family's work this way. So now, having read and understood the passage, let's move on to the questions. Number 1, which choice best summarizes the passage? A character's arrival at her family's ink shop sparks fond memories of her favorite aunt. So again, just to summarize what I've talked about, what I've talked about throughout the lessons that I've given, when you're given a question that asks you to best summarize the passage, you really want to be able to point to some main ideas, and you really want to be able to confirm that each of the ideas that each answer choice gives really exist in the passage. So for example, for choice A, if A were to be the correct answer, it must show a character's arrival at her family's ink shop, and it must show it sparking fond memories of her favorite aunt. So when we really consider this, does a character arrive at her family's ink shop? Yes, the narrator does arrive at her family's ink shop. But does it spark fond memories of her favorite aunt? Maybe it does spark memories, but are they fond memories? We can't really tell. There isn't decisive evidence to prove that. Do we know that it was the narrator's favorite aunt? No, we can't really say that. So therefore, A is not really a very logical and clear answer to be picking. Choice B, a character's surprise visit leads to a happy reunion. So the visit was, I guess you could say it was sort of a surprise because, the people at the shop weren't really expecting the narrator to be there. But is it really a happy reunion? If it was a happy reunion, maybe I would expect, the family members to be, greeting each other, maybe talking about catching up on old times and stuff like that. And we don't really see this, reunion aspect. So for that reason, because it's not really a reunion, we can say that choice B isn't really a good choice. Choice C, a character comes to understand her father's ambitions while visiting her family's ink shop. So again, we see that this answer fulfills one part of the main idea of the passage, in that the narrator is visiting her family's ink shop. But do we see the narrator coming to understand her father's ambitions? We see the father saying the value in their family's ink, but that doesn't really show her father's ambitions. If it were to show her father's ambitions, maybe it would show what the father wants to do in life, or maybe what the narrator's father wants to become, or what he wants to achieve. So we don't really see that, so we can rule out C. So the only really logical choice here is D. And choice D says that a character's visit to her family's ink shop, which is correct information, deepens her appreciation for her family's work. And we can really confirm this through the passage, because we read in the very last lines, "I was very proud to hear father speak of our family's ink this way." She really comes to appreciate the value of her family's ink after hearing her father talk about the ink in this way, like talking about its qualities and how it's very good. So choice D is the correct answer for number 1. Number 2, a main theme of the passage is that family relationships should be nurtured. Again, when we're talking about the main theme of the passage, we should really be able to point out specific places in a passage where the theme exists. So family relationships, there's definitely talk about family relationships because, they talk about the father, the narrator, her aunt, her little uncles. But I would say that the fact that these relationships should be nurtured isn't really a main theme of the passage. So we can sort of move on and come back and reconsider maybe later. Quality is achieved through deliberate effort. This makes logical sense because, again, we read in the passage that the aunt is saying, the narrator recalls her aunt telling her that when you push an ink stick along an inkstone, or when you put in effort, you take the first step to cleansing your mind and your heart. You push and you ask yourself, what are my intentions? What is in my heart that matches my mind? So this is basically, again, like we talked about earlier, it's saying when you really put in the effort, then the good results come. Whereas, if you do not think and you just write what's swimming on top of your brain, then the results are not good. So B really seems like a correct answer here. Choice C, hard work results in material compensation. So there is kind of a concept of hard work, again, in the deliberate effort, similar to choice B. But do we really see a promise of material compensation with hard work? We don't really see that. So because it talks about material compensation and linking it to hard work, we can effectively rule out choice C because there is no talk about material compensation. Choice D, creativity needs to be expressed concretely. There is certainly talk about creativity. For example, when the father talks about your writing will flow as smoothly as a keel cutting through a glassy lake. Your mind will soar into the clouds of higher thought. Kind of talking about this creative aspect, this ascension of the soul maybe when you're using the ink. But there isn't really an indication that it needs to be really expressed concretely. So again, throughout these question choices, we really see the theme of if one single word is wrong within an answer choice, then you can immediately rule out the answer choice. Choice B will be the correct answer for number 2. Number 3, throughout the passage, the narrator is portrayed as someone who is A, reserved around unfamiliar people. So let's see. A point in the passage where I remember she kind of talks about, being reserved and shy is when she talks about little uncle. So she, arrives at the shop and little uncle sort of greets them and seats them at the table. So from his formal tone, I knew he did not recognize who we were. So I called his name in a shy voice. So this does show that she's shy, but does it mean is the uncle really an unfamiliar person to the narrator? This is just showing that she's being shy because the uncle doesn't recognize her. She recognizes the uncle, the narrator recognizes the uncle, but the uncle doesn't recognize her. So in that way, she's not being shy because she is unfamiliar or the uncle is unfamiliar. She's being shy because the uncle does not recognize her. So we can't really say she's reserved because she's around unfamiliar people. So A is, not the best choice. B, attuned to her immediate surroundings. This answer choice makes a lot of sense because if we recall in the passage, when the narrator is, noting down the details of the shop to talk to her friends, she really sees some of the finer details in the shop. She talks about the floors of the shop, they were polished, no dirty footprints, stuff like that. So we can kind of see that she is attuned to her immediate surroundings. Even when she, first enters the shop, she immediately, notices north facing, quite dim inside, and stuff like that. So B seems like a correct answer, but of course we have to consider the rest. Sympathetic to the needs of others. We don't really see her sympathetic side of her. We don't see her, being understanding to other people. We don't see her, trying to help other people. So we don't really see the sympathetic side. So for that reason, C is not really relevant to the passage. Anxious about her responsibilities. So again, in the passage, it doesn't really talk about her responsibilities as a daughter. It doesn't really talk about her responsibilities as a part of this family that owns the shop. It doesn't really show her being anxious either about her duties and her responsibilities. So choice D is not really correct. So number 3 is B. Number 4, it can be most reasonably inferred from the passage that old widow allows reluctance to stay for tea is. So once again, when we talked about her reluctance to stay for tea, we noted that she made weak efforts to leave. So we talked about how this is kind of her way of being polite. So let's try to find an answer that kind of explains this. Old widow allows reluctance to stay for tea is feigned or faked because she is not genuinely firm in her resolve. This kind of is a logical answer because she sort of fakes her reluctance to stay. She fakes her efforts to leave because she is not genuinely firm in her resolve. She doesn't really want to leave. She's just faking it to be polite. So A is a very logical answer for number 4. Inconsiderate because the family has been planning her visit. Well, obviously, there's no indication that the visit was planned, so B is wrong. Appropriate because the shop is unusually busy. There is no indication, again, that the shop is unusually busy, so we can't really confidently choose C. Ill-advised because she is exhausted from the journey. Once again, ill-advised, it's saying that her reluctance to stay is ill-advised. We really see no evidence in the passage pointing to this, and we also see no evidence that she's exhausted from her travel to the shop. So 4 will be A. 5 asks for the best evidence to the choice we picked in 4. And once again, we see the evidence in these lines say that she refused their invitation 3 times, exclaiming that my father and uncles must be too busy for visitors, but she made weak efforts to leave. So ideally, we would look for lines 15 to about, 17 or 18 to point to our answer that we made. So we see that choices C includes lines 15 to 18. So that will be our answer for number 5. Number 6, the narrator indicates that the contrast between the ink making studio at Immortal Heart Village and her family's ink shop is that the ink shop. So if we recall, we go back to the point where the narrator talks about the Immortal Heart Village. She talks about the glass was very shiny and not one pane was broken. Within those glass cases were silk-wrapped boxes, all our hard work. They looked so much nicer than they had in the ink-making studio at Immortal Heart Village. So the narrator is saying that at the family's ink shop, the ink is displayed nicely. It's displayed nicer and in a better way than it was displayed at the Immortal Heart Village. A, it displays the family's ink more impressively. This sounds exactly like what we've been talking about. Choice B, it is more conveniently located for the public. Is it really more conveniently located? Does the narrator really say this? No, she doesn't really say that it's more conveniently located. She says it looks better. See, it provides greater individual attention to customers. Customers are really never talked about here, so we can't really confidently choose C as an answer. Offers a larger space for presenting products. Again, there isn't really necessarily an indication that the new shop location is a larger space than the Immortal Heart Village. So for that reason, our answer choice for number 6 will be A. Number 7, based on the artistic philosophy expressed in the 4th paragraph, lines 46 through 59, it is reasonable to infer that precious auntie would consider a hastily written first draft of a story to be, so lines 46 through 59, which is this paragraph right here. As he said this, blah, 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 I remember a specific point where she says, the problem of modern ink from a bottle, you do not have to think. You simply write what is swimming on top of your brain. And the top is nothing but pond scum, dead leaves, and mosquito spawn. So here we really see Precious Auntie's thinking. She thinks that, you know, if you don't spend time to refine something, if you don't spend time to, you know, ask yourself the questions, what are my intentions, what is in my heart that matches my mind, if you don't really put in the hard work, then, you know, the work that you put out is nothing but pond scum, dead leaves, and mosquito spawn. So in this way, if you hastily write a first draft of the story, in Precious Auntie's eyes, it's likely to be, you know, kind of useless, kind of not refined, kind of, you know, bad work, as opposed to if you actually put in work. So let's look for a answer that kind of embodies that logic. Consider a hastily written first draft to be emotionally raw and powerful. This paints the hastily written first draft to be kind of good because it's emotionally raw, it's powerful, it's moving. I think it paints it in too much of a positive light than in a negative light. B, creatively satisfying for the author. Creatively satisfying, again, it kind of paints the hastily written rough draft in a positive light. It's, you know, creatively satisfying. It satiates the author's desire to, you know, be creative, to tell a story, to paint a piece. So it's too positive, I think, for what Precious Auntie would believe. Essentially worthless in and of itself. This, I think, is obviously a very negative connotation because, you know, it's worthless. And it sort of mirrors what Precious Auntie was saying, because she's saying that if you don't spend time and you don't spend the hard work, then the top is nothing but pond scum, dead leaves, and mosquito spawn. So that it's kind of gives the indication that stuff you don't spend time on is worthless. Inappropriately analytical for a piece of art. Analytical. Again, back to the motif here in the reading questions. If one word in the answer choice is wrong, then the whole thing is wrong. Precious Auntie, never talks about art being analytical or calculative or, you know, sort of technical. She never talks about this. So we can't confidently choose D as an answer. So 7 will be C. Again, a best evidence question for our choice in number 7. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So ideally, we already pointed to, you know, this line about the mosquito spawn and the pond scum. That's around, you know, lines 53 to 55, around there. So ideally, we would see 53 to 55. And of course, here, you simply ending spawn, which is exactly what we pointed to when we answered the previous question. You simply write what is swimming on top of your brain. And the top is nothing but pond scum, dead leaves, and mosquito spawn. Sort of providing evidence that, you know, a hastily written rough draft might be essentially worthless because it needs no effort. As used in line 59, matches most nearly means. So line 59, what are my intentions? What is in my heart that matches my mind? So sort of, before we look at the answer choices, let's just sort of think. What is in my heart that matches my mind? So really, in context, she is saying your heart, what your heart is saying really needs to align with what your mind is saying in order to produce the best work. Your heart needs to match your mind. Your heart needs to correspond with your mind. Your heart needs to align with your mind. Those are possible synonyms that are coming into my mind right now. Competes against. Competes against is like sort of the opposite of what we're talking about. You want your heart and your mind to match. You don't want it to compete. So A is the wrong answer. Corresponds with, this is one of the synonyms that I brought up earlier. So obviously this is a correct choice, or it seems like a correct choice, at least initially, because the heart is sort of matching with the mind. Runs counter to. Runs counter to, it just plainly sounds like wrong. Runs counter to, it just doesn't really encapsulate the same meaning as matches. Treats equally. Treats equally, again, if you plug it in, what is in my heart that treats equally my mind? we're not really talking about how the heart and the mind are equal, but we're talking about how what the heart wants is similar or corresponds to what the mind wants. So number 9 is B. Okay, number 10, as used in line 68, clean most nearly means. So line 68, we see that a sound as clean and as pure as a small silver bell. So here, clean obviously doesn't mean like not dirty, like free of dirt, sanitized. It doesn't mean that. It means sort of like a distinct sound, a recognizable sound, a sound that you could, hear and tell what it's from. So let's find a word that encapsulates that meaning. Complete. Complete doesn't really show the meaning. If we plug in the word, I heard a sound as complete and pure as a small silver bell. You can't really, describe a sound as complete. Skillful. Skillful is obviously, again, similar to complete, not a word that typically is used to describe sound. Sound isn't really skillful. Sound is like, a sense. It's not, a task that you can, skillfully complete. Distinct. Distinct, as we talked about earlier, matches well with the sentence. If we plug it in, I heard a sound as distinct and pure as a small silver bell. So again, she is saying that the sound the ink stick makes is, very distinct. She can instinctively, match it to the sound of a bell. So that really makes sense in context. And the last choice, upright, that just doesn't make sense at all. Upright is sort of like a position, and obviously sound, it doesn't really make sense if you say, a sound is upright. I don't even know what that means. So the answer choice for number 10 will be C, distinct. Moving on to the second passage of the reading section in the October 2017 exam. This passage is adapted from How the Web Affects Memory, 2011 by Harvard Magazine Incorporated. Search engines have changed the way we use the internet, putting vast sources of information just a few clicks away. But Harvard professor of psychology Daniel Wegner's recent research proves that websites and the internet are changing much more than technology itself. They are changing the way our memories function. Wegner's latest study, Google Effects on Memory, Cognitive Consequences of Having Information at Our Fingertips, shows that when people have access to search engines, they remember fewer facts and less information because they know they can rely on search as a readily available shortcut. So here, immediately at the beginning of the passage, it sort of references a study by Wegner, saying that, humans with Google, with search engines and the internet, are sort of handicapped because they don't have to memorize as much information. Instead, they can just search it up and it's readily available whenever they want it. Wegner, the senior author of the study, believes that new findings show that the internet has become part of a transactive memory source. What's that? A method by which our brains compartmentalize information. So this transactive memory source, as we understand right now, is a special way in which our brains can, sort information. First hypothesized by Wegner in 1985, transactive memory exists in many forms, as when a husband relies on his wife to remember a relative's birthday. So this is sort of an example, and from this example we can kind of deduce that a transactive memory source is sort of a memory source in which you only have to remember a general source of information, and remembering this general source of information will provide you access to more specific information. So for example, in this example, the passage gives about a husband telling his wife a relative's birthday and telling her to remember is that the husband doesn't have to memorize the relative's birthday anymore. He just has to remember who knows it. So the wife is sort of the transactive memory source because the husband can always come to her to get the relative's birthday. It is this whole network of memory where you don't have to remember everything in the world yourself, he says. You just have to remember who knows it. Now, computers and technology as well are becoming virtual extensions of our memory. So the author is basically saying that computers are basically serving the same purpose as the wife in this example. The idea validates habits already forming in our daily lives. Cell phones have become the primary location for phone numbers. GPS devices in cars remove the need to memorize directions. Wagner points out that we never have to stretch our memories too far to remember the name of an obscure movie actor or the capital of Kyrgyzstan. We just type our questions into Google. We become part of the internet in a way, he says. We become part of the system, and we end up trusting it. Working with researchers Betsy Sparrow of Columbia University and Jenny Liu of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Wagner conducted 4 experiments to demonstrate the phenomenon, using various forms of memory recall to test reliance on computers. So he's saying, well, we know that technology has played a huge role in the memory capabilities of humans, but I really want to test how reliant really are humans on, these transactive memory sources such as the internet on memorizing information. So in the first experiment, participants demonstrated that they were more likely to think of computer terms like Yahoo or Google after being asked a difficult set of trivia questions. That's very interesting. So basically, the passage is saying that when people are being asked, trivia questions that they don't know, they're increasingly likely to think of these sources of information, these transactive memory sources such as Yahoo and Google. In 2 other experiments, participants were asked to type a collection of readily memorable statements such as an ostrich's eye is bigger than its brain. Half the subjects were told that their work would be saved to a computer, the other half were informed that the statements would be erased. In subsequent memory testing, participants who were told their work would not be saved were best at recalling statements. So this is again showing our reliance on computers. If they're told that the computers wouldn't remember what they typed, then they have to rely on themselves and not on the computers. In a 4th experiment, participants typed into a computer statements they were told would be saved in specific folders. Next, they were asked to recall the statements. Finally, they were given cues to the wording and asked to name the folders where the statements were stored. The participants proved better able to recall folder locations than the statements themselves. So again, this is a case of memorizing who knows the information rather than what the information is itself. Wagner concedes that questions remain about whether dependence on computers will affect memories negatively. Nobody knows now what the effects are of these tools on logical thinking. Students who have trouble remembering distinct facts, for example, may struggle to employ those facts in critical thinking, but he believes that the situation overall is beneficial. So he's saying that this reliance on computers isn't necessarily bad, likening dependence on computers to dependence on a mechanical hand or prosthetic device. So he's basically saying that a computer is not something that's, taking over our minds and, harming our minds. It's more of, it can be thought of like a tool to help us be better, like a mechanical hand or a prosthetic device. And even though we may not be taxing our memories to recall distinct facts, we are still using them to consider where the facts are located and how to access them. We still have to remember things, Wagner explains. We're just remembering a different range of things. Okay, so he's saying that our mind is still being stimulated to remember things, we're just remembering where to find things rather than the traditional way, which is to remember the actual things. He believes his study will lead to further research into understanding computer dependence and looks forward to tracing the extent of human interdependence with the computer world, pinpointing the movable dividing line between us and our computers in cyber networks. And then here's a graph. Results of experiment 4, memory of statements and folder locations. So we can see that the percent of participants who remember nothing is the greatest, and the percent of people who remember the folder locations and not the statements were greater than the people who remember the statements and not the folder locations. So data that goes along with the experiment, essentially. Number 11, the main purpose of the passage is to A. Describe a series of experiments on the way technology interferes with critical thinking. So we don't really see technology interfering with critical thinking because, again, the researcher in the article clearly points out that, computers aren't really harming our memory. They're just making us use our memory in a different way. So because the passage never really says that technology interferes, we can just mark it off as wrong. Assert that people have become overly dependent on computers for storing information. This is kind of saying the same thing as choice A. saying that computers are negatively impacting our memory because we're becoming overly dependent. But, the main purpose, or the author of the passage, the researcher that's being referenced in the passage rather, doesn't really share the same viewpoint, so it can't be the main purpose of the passage. Discuss the idea that humans' capacity for memory is much weaker than it once was. Again, there is no indication that human memory is much weaker. The passage merely says that human memory is used for a different purpose than it once was. It doesn't say that it's much weaker. So D will probably be the correct answer, but we still have to justify it. Share the findings of a study. Okay, there was a study. There was a series of 4 studies, so that's correct, examining the effect of computer use on memory recall. And yeah, so this is obviously all correct information. And what we can see from this question is that D is sort of a more broad and a more general answer choice than choices A, B, and C. So this is a common theme with a lot of the questions. A lot of the answer choices will try to trap you by forcing you to pick an answer choice that the passage doesn't really say explicitly. For example, technology interferes, people are becoming overly dependent, memory is much weaker. So it's easy to fall into these traps, but if you really, pick apart each of the answer choices and see, does the passage really say this, then you're pretty much guaranteed to come to the right answer every time. Okay, number 12, which choice best supports the idea that reliance on computers does not necessarily diminish human memory? So maybe we are looking for the certain lines in the passage. I recall the author kind of saying that, the use of computers doesn't diminish our memory. We're just using our memory in a different way, or we're applying our memory to a different concept. So let's see. Here, the author says, and even though we may not be taxing our memories to recall distinct facts, we are still using them to consider where the facts are located and how to access them. So the author is saying here that, our memory isn't being diminished. We're just using it in a different way. And that is a direct answer to this question. So number 12, the answer will be D. In context, the reference to remembering a relative's birthday mainly serves to. So if we go back, the husband tells the wife the relative's birthday so he doesn't have to remember it. So this is it serves as, an example of how a transactive memory source works. And if we really consider it, this example is sort of relatable because it is, a situation that could and might have happened to a lot of readers. And in that way, it makes the information more digestible and more easy to understand. So let's look for an answer choice. Show that people who are closely related tend to have shared memories. So there is a sharing of memories technically, but does it really show that there's a correlation between closely related people and having shared memories? No, it's simply pointing out an example. B, to demonstrate how people initially developed external sources of memory. Initially developed seems like this wording makes it sound like, it's like a discovery of how the first humans had external sources of memory. It isn't really the correct wording here. Choice C, to emphasize the effectiveness and accuracy of transactive memory sources. Well, it definitely talks about transactive memory sources, but does it talk about does it emphasize how effective and how accurate they are? It doesn't really talk about that. It just talks about how they work. Choice D, to illustrate a concept. Okay, it does illustrate a concept because it provides an example of a transactive memory source using a familiar situation. So this is kind of what we talked about, right? Because the situation regarding, someone telling another person something is probably something that a lot of readers can, relate to, something that a lot of readers maybe did themselves. So it helps us to better understand the situation. So 13 is D. Number 14, based on the information in the passage, which of the following would be considered a transactive memory source? So once again, a transactive memory source is a memory source where it stores specific information into a more general place. So this helps because you only have to memorize where the specific information, where the general information is. You don't have to memorize each of the specific informations. Okay, so A is a souvenir brought home from a memorable trip. So this kind of makes sense, but it is actually a flawed answer, because a souvenir brought home from a memorable trip, you might think, oh, it's a transactive memory source, because a souvenir helps you sort of remember the memorable trip, but it doesn't really, store information. It isn't really a transaction, similar to the example where it doesn't really store, similar to the example where we talked about the husband's birthdays, the husband's relatives' birthdays. The husband is storing, specific information inside the transactive memory source. And we don't really talk about specific information here. We just talk about a memorable trip, not specific information. B, a written list of a user's passwords for different websites. So here we see, a general source, a written list of a user's passwords for different websites. This is the specific information. So this seems like a very logical answer because, again, as with the transactive memory source, you only have to remember where the list of the passwords are, or where the list of the passwords is, instead of memorizing each of the individual passwords. So B seems like the correct answer for number 14. C, a library database that helps users locate specific books. This transactive memory source isn't really a personal transactive memory source. It's more of a tool that helps use. It's more of like a tool, a database in this wording, a database that helps users locate specific books. It's, a public source of information. It doesn't really pertain to an individual's memory and an individual's personal data. A website that helps users plan and make travel arrangements. Here we don't really see specific information being encoded into a general area. We see that a website has, maybe travel ideas and stuff, but we don't really see stuff being stored for easier memory. So 14 is B. 15, as used in line 26, extensions of most nearly means. 26, now computers and technology as well are becoming virtual extensions of our memory. So virtual extensions means sort of like add-ons to our memory, additional parts of our memory. Sort of like external storage in a way, because our memory can now, computers can now store stuff in our mind that we previously needed to memorize, but now we don't need to memorize. So something that goes along with that is additions to. 16, the discussion of the experiment suggests that people are inclined to think of specific information sources. So specific information sources kind of talks about like maybe search engines, specific sources of information, not the information itself. So maybe like when the article talked about Yahoo and Bing, in response to being required to memorize details that will then be made inaccessible. Let's go back to the passage. In the first experiment, participants demonstrated that they were more likely to think of computer terms like Yahoo or Google, again, as in the question, specific information sources like Yahoo or Google, after being asked a set of difficult trivia questions. So let's see. After they were required to memorize details that would then be made inaccessible. There's no indication here that, the trivia questions were going to be made inaccessible. Choice B, directed to develop a system for organizing and saving content. The study isn't really about telling them difficult trivia questions and then telling them to, organize the trivia questions into groups. So that isn't really a correct answer. Asked to provide facts that are not already familiar to them. That sounds like difficult trivia questions. People are more likely to think about outside sources of information like Yahoo or Google after being asked to provide facts that are not already familiar in the form of difficult trivia questions. So choice C seems very logical for number 16. Choice D, prompted to identify terms related to dependence on computers. Again, there isn't really any indication that there are terms related to dependence on computers. It really just talks about difficult trivia questions, so D is wrong. And we see again that in our analysis of the question, of the previous question, number 16, we have also indirectly answered number 17, because an answer choice to number 17 is lines 42 through 45, which really, talk about how people are more likely to think about general sources of information when they're asked something that are some things that are difficult to understand. So 17 is A. As used in line 67, employ most nearly means. Students who are having trouble remembering distinct facts, for example, may struggle to employ these facts. So in this context, employ kind of means use or to apply these facts in critical thinking. So a word that kind of goes along with sort of the synonyms that we talked about is utilize. Utilize really takes on the same meaning as, use, to apply. Students, if we plug it in, students who have trouble remembering distinct facts, for example, may struggle to utilize those facts in critical thinking. They may struggle to use those facts in critical thinking. Very similar here. And it does make sense in context, so it must be the right answer. Number 19, according to the graph, approximately what percentage of participants remembered both parts of the information given to them during the fourth experiment? Fourth experiment and both parts are the key info that we're trying to extract from this graph. Excuse me. So this graph is all experiment 4, so we're good on that. And we're asked again in the question to find what percent of participants remembered both pieces of information. So one piece of information was folder locations and the other was statements. So remembered statements and folder locations. So we see here the first one is both. So this is between 15 and 20. So we should be looking for, 17, 18, 16, something like that. Oh, sorry about that. So again, we see number 17. The number 17 here. So the choice is C. Based on the description of Wagner's fourth experiment, what is the most likely explanation for the findings for the largest single group of participants represented in the graph? So the largest single groups of participants is the participants that, remembered nothing from the experiment. So the question is asking us to provide an explanation. Why might people not remember anything from the that they were asked to remember? A, those participants focused on remembering folder locations. We can't really say this because we can't really say what each of the participants were trying to remember. There's nothing in the passage that talks about this, and there's really no way. Each of the participants, when they were doing it, they could have been thinking about anything. We don't know what they were actively trying to remember. Those participants attempted to remember the statements and the folder locations. Well, again, we can't tell what they attempted to remember. Those participants did not attempt to remember any specific pieces of information. Again, during the study, there's no way we can tell what they were trying to remember unless they specifically told us in the passage. And they really didn't tell us in the passage. They didn't say those who didn't remember anything were trying to remember both of the specific information and, the locations. It didn't point to any specific evidence in the text, or no specific evidence was given in the text. So we can't logically make this assumption not knowing what the people were thinking. There is not enough information to determine the cause of the results for those participants. This seems like this is the right answer because, once again, there's no way for us as a test taker to know what the participants were thinking if it's not directly given in the passage. We can't, make logical jumps and jump to conclusions and make false assumptions, because again, there's no specific evidence that we can point to justify our answer. So for that reason, the answer to number 20 must be D. There's not enough information to determine the cause for the results of those participants. Moving on to the third passage of the SAT reading section on the October 2017 test. This passage is adapted from Marlene Zook. Paleo Fantasy. What evolution really tells us about sex, diet, and how we live. A female guppy can be sexually mature at 2 months of age and have her first babies just a month later. This unstinting rate of reproduction makes guppies ideally suited for studying the rate of evolution. And David Resnick, a biologist at UC Riverside, has been doing exactly that for the last few decades. So the first paragraph is basically talking about how in science, because we have to do a lot of tests on like animals to study evolution, guppies are a good candidate for animals to be they're good animals to be used in studies because they evolve extremely fast. People usually think of guppies as colorful aquarium fish, but they also have a life in the real world, inhabiting streams and rivers in tropical places like Trinidad, where Resnick has done his fieldwork. Guppies can experience different kinds of conditions depending on the luck of the draw. A lucky guppy is born above a waterfall or a set of rapids, which keep out the predatory fish called pike cichlids found in calmer downstream waters. As you might expect, the guppy mortality rate, that is, the proportion of individuals that die, is much higher in the sites with the rapacious cichlids than in those without them. Resnick has shown that if you bring the fish into the lab and let them breed there, the guppies from the sites with many predators become sexually mature when they are younger and smaller than do the guppies from predator-free sites. In addition, the litters of baby guppies produced by mothers from the high-risk streams are larger, but each individual baby is smaller than those produced by their counterparts. So here, this is kind of showing the findings that Resnick has found in his studies. He's saying that in the areas where there are not a lot of predators for the guppies, the guppy mothers give birth at a much later age, and they give birth to much less guppies because the baby guppies have a higher chance of surviving, as opposed to downstream in calmer waters where there's a lot of predators. Guppies give birth extremely early, and they give birth to a lot of baby guppies to try to get more to survive. The disparity makes sense because if you are at risk of being eaten, being able to have babies sooner and spreading your energy reserves over a lot of them makes it more likely that you will manage to pass on some of your genes before you meet your fate. So exactly what we said. Resnick and other scientists also demonstrate that these traits are controlled by the guppy's genes, not by the environment in which they grow up. How quickly, though, could these differences in how the two kinds of guppies live their lives have evolved? Because there are numerous tributaries of the streams in Trinidad, with guppies living in some but not all of them, Resnick realized that he could, as he put in a 2008 paper, treat streams like giant test tubes by introducing guppies or predators to places they had not originally occurred, and then watch as natural selection acted on the guppies. So here, basically, the article is kind of talking about Resnick's method of study. He found that he can actually conduct studies in a stream because the streams are like, giant test tubes. They really facilitate his research. This kind of real-world manipulation of nature is called experimental evolution, and it is growing increasingly popular among scientists working with organisms that reproduce quickly enough for humans to be able to see the outcome within our lifetimes. So Resnick's method of study, studying these organisms in their native habitats, is growing to be very popular in the scientific community. Along with his students and colleagues, Resnick removed groups of guppies from their predator-ridden lives below the waterfall and released them into previously guppy-free streams above the falls. Although small predatory killifish occurred in these new sites, these fish do not pose anything close to the danger of the cichlids. Then the scientists waited for nature to do its work, and they brought the descendants of the transplanted fish back to the lab to examine their reproduction. So again, these transplanted fish are the ones that were previously taken from downstream where there's a lot of predators to a more safer environment where there's less predators. After just 11 years, the guppies released in the new stream, so the ones with less predators, had evolved to mature later and have fewer, bigger offspring in each litter, just like the guppies that naturally occurred. So we see this very fast rate of evolution in these guppies. Other studies of guppies in Trinidad have shown evolutionary change in as few as 2.5 years, so they evolve very rapidly, or a little over 4 generations, with more time required for genetic shifts in traits such as the ability to form schools, and less time for changes in the colorful spots and stripes on a male's body. So at the end of the passage, they basically talk about some traits in guppies, like the ability to form schools, evolve much more slowly than other traits such as colorful spots and stripes on a male's body do. So we have two figures here, mean number of guppy offspring in high and low predation environments. So we can see in each of the high predation environments, the first graph and the third graph, the mean number of offspring is very large because the mothers are trying to get more babies to survive. Whereas in low predation environments, the mean number of offspring is less. And mean embryo mass, so how big the guppy offspring are. We can again see that in high predation environments, the first and third bar, the mean embryo or the size of the babies are much smaller, so they can give birth to more babies. Whereas in low predation environments, the mass of the babies is much larger because more are expected to survive. So let's move on to the questions. Number 21, the first paragraph mainly serves to, this first paragraph, I recall we talked about how guppies are, again, ideally suited for studying the rate of evolution because they evolve so fast. So maybe we should be looking for an answer that talks about how guppies are, a good animal to be used in scientific research. A, to establish the reason why a certain species was selected for scientific observation. This is exactly what we talked about because it talks about how guppies, are a good candidate for scientific observation because they evolve extremely fast. B, to illustrate the value of studying the offspring of a particular animal shortly after birth. It doesn't give any justification for the value. It just talks about guppies and studying the offspring of a particular animal shortly after birth. It doesn't really talk about studying guppy babies, so it doesn't talk about studying an animal shortly after birth, so B is wrong. Introduce a theory at the center of an ongoing scientific debate. With these questions, with these answer choices, you really need to be able to point to a point in the paragraph, a point in the passage, where it specifically talks about each part of the answer choice. And in this part of the answer choice, we don't really see any talk of a scientific debate going on, so we can't choose C as an answer. Choice D, offer a rationale for the prevalence of a new field of scientific inquiry. Again, similar to the method we used in part C, we don't see a rationale being offered, and moreover, more importantly, we don't see the prevalence of a new field of scientific inquiry. We're just talking about how guppies are good to be used as animals in scientific experiments. Okay, moving on to number 22. In describing the living conditions of guppies, the author indicates that a lucky guppy, line 14, is one that, line 14. A lucky guppy is born above a waterfall or a set of rapids, which keep out the predatory fish called pike cichlids. So basically the author is saying here that a lucky guppy is one that is, by luck, born in a place where there are not a lot of predators that can eat it. So we should be looking for an answer choice that talks about that. A, is born in a major river having an established guppy population. The author never talks about, the guppy is born into a place where it has a lot of other guppies living around it, so A is wrong. B, inhabits an environment that provides natural protection from its predators. That sounds exactly like what we were talking about, because once again, if we look back, the natural protection, once again, the natural protection that we're looking for is, the waterfall or the rapids that keep out the predatory fish. So we really see both parts of the answer choice B being fulfilled here, because it does provide natural protection and it does provide natural protection from predators. C, manages to navigate the risks associated with living near a waterfall. Well, guppies in this case do sort of live near waterfall and rapids, But a lucky guppy isn't one that, is able to navigate the risks. That isn't really luck-based. Luck-based is more of like it was sort of born into a good condition. So that doesn't really demonstrate luck, and also the author never really talks about navigating risks. Avoids predatory fish by living in calmer downstream waters. This is just blatantly wrong information, because the calmer downstream waters are, if we recall from the passage, they're where there's more predators. So the guppies aren't really avoiding predatory fish by living in downstream waters. So D is just wrong. Number 23, which choice provides the best evidence for the conclusion that the streams used by Resnick's team were not entirely free of predators? So immediately I can already think back to the passage. I can remember a point where they talked about killifish that existed in the streams. And they talked about how killifish were predators, but they weren't as dangerous as the cichlids were. So let's try to find that. So here, we already highlighted it in lines around 58. Although small predatory killifish occurred in these new sites, these fish do not pose anything close to the danger of the cichlids. So let's look for those lines here, and lines 57 through 59. So these lines, again, as we looked at, they show that there were predators in the water, because the killifish are predators of the guppies. In lines 43 through 44, Resnick uses the phrase giant test tubes to suggest that certain streams can, lines 43 through 44, Resnick realized that he could, as he put in a 2008 paper, treat streams like giant test tubes by introducing guppies or predators to places they had not originally occurred. So essentially, to kind of summarize or to kind of analyze what he's saying here, he's basically saying that by introducing, guppies to these places that had not originally occurred, he is essentially treating these streams as a place where he can conduct research and it sort of provides value to his research, because he can, conduct experiments in these streams. A, to provide suitable experimental conditions. This sounds like what we talked about. The streams are, test tubes, because they're kind of sort of a tool for Resnick to conduct his studies. Promote cooperative behavior in specimens. What I really don't like about this answer is that there really is no talk about cooperation between two different species or within the same species, so we can't really choose B. Expedite the rate of genetic changes. Okay, the passage does talk a lot about how guppies have an extremely fast rate of genetic change, but if we look back, the passage never talks about the rate of genetic change being expedited by these streams. Expedited meaning, made faster, sped up. The streams don't speed up the rate of genetic change. They're just basically a place where this rate of genetic change can be studied and where it can be observed. D, to solve widespread environmental problems. We never really see any mention of any widespread environmental problems in these few lines, so we can't really choose D. So A is the answer. Number 25, as used in line 49, popular most nearly means. Line 49. This kind of real-world manipulation of nature is called experimental evolution, and it is growing increasingly popular among scientists working with organisms that reproduce quickly enough for humans to be able to see the outcome within our lifetimes. So basically what the passage says here is that Resnick has sort of pioneered this wave of scientific research method, this sort of testing out in the wild that has become increasingly popular or increasingly widely recognized, increasingly widely used, increasingly, increasingly noted by scientists. So we should be looking for words that sort of capture that meaning. Increasingly accessible. Accessibility was never a question in these, and frankly, it doesn't really work well in context, because accessibility isn't really a question that's talked about. We're not talking about oh, are these research methods accessible to all scientists? Can all scientists, study and do research in this way if they wanted? This isn't really the point of this word. Suitable. Suitable makes it seem like, is this method of study a good way to conduct research? And that's not really what we're talking about. Widespread. Widespread, I think it works very well in context because it kind of shows how the popularity of this method of study is increasing and how more and more scientists are using it. So its influence is becoming more widespread. Likable. Likable, well, first of all, if you're using a research method, you don't necessarily have to like it. So we don't necessarily know that because it's becoming more popular and more used, that it's also becoming more liked by scientists. So we can't really choose that. It doesn't really make sense in context. Number 26, which finding, if accurate, would undermine Resnick's findings? So again, Resnick's findings, if we're to answer this question correctly, which finding, if accurate, would undermine Resnick's findings? So first we have to figure out what was Resnick's findings. So Resnick's findings, in this experiment that he did, were that when he transplanted these fish back into the lab to analyze their reproduction, he found that because he released the fish into these streams with less predators, they developed to mature later and have fewer, bigger offspring and more offspring in each litter. So A, guppies examined in other parts of the globe exhibit genetic shifts in traits at a different rate from that exhibited by the guppies Resnick examined. So this doesn't really undermine Resnick's claim at all. It doesn't really, it isn't really relevant. If Resnick's claim was all guppies have the same rate of shift in genetic traits, then sure, this would undermine it because it says that genetic shifts occur at a different rate. But because Resnick's claim isn't that, then it doesn't undermine it. The new site into which Resnick released the guppies is inhabited by fish that are found to be as predatory as the cichlids in the original sites. Okay, this seems like the right answer because, again, if we consider what his findings were that because he released these guppies into streams that had, less danger of predation, then they had XYZ changes. They matured later, have fewer, bigger offspring. So basically, if it was found that the guppies were actually released into a site where there were very dangerous predators, then his claim would be undermined because then the reasoning that the predation and the predatory species was the reason for the genetic shift would be false. C, experimental evolution is shown to be harmful to the environments where studies like Resnick's are conducted. Environmental concerns weren't really a question. We weren't really talking about, will this, destroy habitats? Will this do, pollute the habitats or stuff like that? No, it's not really essential to Resnick's claim, so C is wrong. The descendants of Resnick's transplanted fish are proven to mature later than guppies living below the waterfall. Well, this won't undermine Resnick's claim because, Resnick's transplanted fish mature later than the guppies, but if the descendants of the transplanted fish also mature later, like their parents, this doesn't undermine his claim. It's just kind of logical that they would do that following, evolutionary trends. So D is wrong. Number 27, it can most reasonably be inferred from the passage that the experiments in Trinidad have shown which of the following about guppies. So to answer this question, we have to find in the passage where it talks about Trinidad, and we have to consider the context around where Trinidad is referenced. So here, other studies of guppies, starting in line 67. Other studies of guppies in Trinidad have shown evolutionary change in as few as 2.5 years, or a little over 4 generations, with more time required for genetic shifts in traits such as ability to form schools, and less time for changes in the colorful spots and stripes on a male's body. So here, in the part where the article talks about Trinidad, They're basically saying that, yes, our studies in Trinidad basically confirm that guppies evolve at an extremely high rate. But there's also one interesting thing to note. Different traits take more or less time, depending on the traits, to shift genetically. It says that the ability to form schools, takes more time to change than the trait of colorful spots and stripes. So let's look back at the answer choices. Some genetic traits will evolve more readily than others. This makes immediate sense because, as we talked about, the studies in Trinidad show that, once again, going back to the passage, the ability to form schools, shifts genetically, less readily, or it shifts slower than the traits of colorful spots and stripes. B, some predatory fish are more dangerous to guppies than cichlids are. This part of the passage that mentions Trinidad doesn't even talk about the danger of the predators of the guppies, so that's wrong. Some guppies thrive better in areas below waterfalls than they do in areas above waterfalls. Again, waterfalls never are talked about, habitats aren't talked about, so we can't choose that answer. Some genetic shifts are easier to prevent. This is kind of on topic because it talks about genetic shifts, but again, if one word in an answer choice is wrong, then the entire answer choice is wrong. This answer choice does talk about genetic shift, but it doesn't talk about preventing genetic shift in the text, so we can't choose that answer. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So once again, as we talked about here, lines around 67 through 72, and it does show that it is an answer choice. So D is the correct answer. Number 29, according to figure 1, so a graph question here, guppies living in the south slope high predation environment produced a mean number of offspring between, okay, so figure 1, south slope high predation. Figure 1, south slope high predation, so this is figure 1. So a mean number of offspring between, so we can see between 6 and 7, the bar is in between 6 and 7. So what is the answer choice for that? The answer choice is D. Which conclusion about the mean mass of guppy embryos is best supported by figure 2? So let's look at figure 2. Figure 2. So figure 2, you can see that when you change the slope, so south slope and north slope, when you change the slope, it doesn't really have an effect on the mean embryo mass. See, it still levels out at about 0.8. However, if you change from high predation to low predation on the same slope, you can see that from the first two bars at least, and the third and fourth bars, that the mean embryo mass changes by a lot. So really what figure 2 is telling us is that change in slope doesn't really change mean embryo mass, but changing from high to low predation really increases the mean embryo mass. A, the slope location was a better indicator than the predation level. This is wrong because, as we just talked about, slope location isn't a good indicator of mean embryo mass. Predation level is really the main indicator. B, the mean embryo mass of guppies born in the north slope environments exceeded the mean embryo mass of guppies born in the south slope environment. So north slope embryo mass is greater than south slope embryo mass. So this we can't really draw definitive evidence from this graph, but even if we, were to sort of estimate it, you can see that, the first and third bar, south versus north, is basically equal, but the second south slope bar in comparison to the fourth north slope bar is much higher. So I would say that the south slope is actually more than the north slope. So B is wrong. The predation level observed in each environment had more of an effect on mean embryo mass than did slope location. So this is saying that predation level is a bigger factor in mean embryo mass than slope location. And this is what we talked about, so C will be the answer. The guppies born in the low predation environments had a mean embryo mass less than the guppies born in the high predation environments. This is just, a false statement, because in the low predation environments, as we can see, south slope low predation and north slope low predation, in each of the low predation environments, the mean embryo mass was greater, not less. So D is wrong. 31, the last question. The data presented in figures 1 and 2 best support the conclusion that compared with guppies from high predation environments, guppies from low predation environments were more likely to. So this question is really asking us to pull data from each of the two figures, both figures 1 and 2. So let's draw conclusions from both of them. So figure 1 is basically telling us that in high predation environments, as we can see from bars 1 and 3, the mean number of offspring is greater. And figure 2 is telling us that in high predation environments, bars 1 and 3 again, the mean embryo mass is lower. So let's look for an answer choice that shows that. High predation environments have fewer offspring and reach full maturity sooner. That's just wrong. It's not supported by the data. In high predation environments, we're actually talking about low predation environments. So in comparison to high predation environments, low predation environments were more likely to have fewer offspring and reach full maturity sooner. In low predation environments, it is true that they have fewer offspring, but they don't reach full maturity earlier. They reach full maturity later, so that's just wrong. B, low predation environments are more likely to low predation environment guppies, are more likely to be a part of a smaller litter and have greater mean embryo mass. Well, this is just supported by the data, so this looks like the right answer. Low predation environment guppies are more likely to have a higher rate of survival. That is true because there's less predation, obviously, and have less mean embryo mass. While the data shows, the data from figure 2 specifically shows that in low predation environments, they have a higher mean embryo mass. So the C is wrong. Produce a greater number of offspring and have greater mean embryo mass. They do have greater mean embryo mass, but they produce less offspring because the offspring are more likely to survive. So D is wrong. So the answer to number 31 is B. The history passage of the October 2017 SAT. This passage is adapted from a speech delivered in 1838 by Sarah T. Smith at the Second Anti-Slavery Convention of American Women. We are told that it is not within the province of women to discuss the subject of slavery, that it is a political question and we are stepping out of our sphere when we take part in its discussion. It is not true that it is merely a political question. It is likewise a question of justice, of humanity, of morality, of religion, a question which, while it involves considerations of immense importance to the welfare and prosperity of our country, enters deeply into the home concerns, the everyday feelings of millions of our fellow beings. Whether the laborer shall receive his reward of his labor or be driven daily to unrequited toil, whether he shall walk erect in the dignity of conscious manhood or be reckoned among the beasts which perish, whether his bones and sinews shall be his own or another's, whether his child shall receive the protection of its natural guardian or be ranked among the livestock of the estate, to be disposed of as the caprice or interest of the master may dictate. These considerations are all involved in the question of liberty or slavery. So in this first passage, the speaker is basically talking about the role of woman in discussing this, question of slavery. So at the beginning, she obviously says that women are told that they don't have a place in this discussion and that, the subject of slavery is a political question. But then she refutes this, this stereotype by saying that, slavery isn't merely just a political question. It's actually, a question of many other things such as justice, humanity, morality, religion. And then she talks about sort of these things, whether the laborer shall be treated fairly or treated like an animal, whether his children will get protection or be treated like, treated like trash, basically. These considerations are all a part of slavery. Slavery is not just a political question. And is a subject comprehending interests of such magnitude merely a political question, and one in which woman can take no part with losing something of the modesty and gentleness which are her most appropriate ornaments? So basically, she's asking, just because, women can talk about and be active in these political questions, it doesn't mean that they'll lose their modesty and gentleness. So this is kind of like a counter argument to maybe what a lot of men would say. Maybe men of the time would say, oh, if women get involved in politics, they'll lose some of their modesty, they'll lose some of their feminine features, they'll lose their gentleness. But the speaker's really saying here that women can take part in these political discussions, but they can still keep their feminine features. May not the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit exist within an upright mind and enlightened intellect? And must woman necessarily be less gentle because her heart is open to the claims of humanity, or less modest because she feels for the degradation of her enslaved sisters, and would stretch forth her hand for the rescue? So again, just talking about how just because, women are involved in politics and involved in the debate over slavery, that doesn't mean that they lose their feminine features. That doesn't mean that their quiet spirit is, sort of lost. By the Constitution of the United States, the whole physical power of the North is pledged for suppression of domestic insurrections. And should the slaves, maddened by oppression, endeavor to shake off the yoke of the taskmaster, so should they rebel against their slaveholders, the men of the North are bound to make common cause with the tyrant. The men of the North are obligated to help the Southern slave owners and put down at the point of the bayonet every effort on the part of the slave for the attainment of his freedom. And when the father, husband, son, and brother shall have left their homes to mingle in the unholy warfare, to become executioners of their brethren, to become executioners of their brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands, will the mother, wife, daughter, and sister feel that they have no interest in the subject? Will it be easy to convince them that it is no concern of theirs, that their homes are rendered desolate and their habitations the abodes of wretchedness? Surely this consideration is of itself sufficient to arouse the slumbering energies of woman. For the overthrow of a system which thus threatens to lay in ruins the fabric of her domestic happiness, and she will not be deterred from the performance of her duty to herself, her family, and her country by the cry of a political question. So in this paragraph, the author is, or not the author, but the speaker rather, is basically saying that, the men of the North are, by the Constitution, are obligated to help the slaveholders of the South, suppress any slave rebellions or insurrections. And basically she's saying later on in the back half of the passage that, when the men go off to become the executioners of their own brethren, to fight this, pointless war against their own people, women aren't really just going to sit around and watch their homes be destroyed by this war. They aren't really going to just watch as everything unfolds in front of them. They're naturally, going to be very engaged in this, because this also, the war over slavery also matters to them. And for that reason, the speaker feels like women do have a right to become, involved in this political question. But admitting it to be a political question, have we no interest in the welfare of our country? So again, this idea of the political question. May we not permit a thought to stray beyond the narrow limits of our own family circle and of the present hour? May we not breathe a sigh over the miseries of our countrymen, nor utter a word of remonstrance against the unjust laws that are crushing them to the earth? Must we witness the headlong rage or headless folly with which our nation is rushing onward to destruction, and not seek to arrest its downward course? Shall we silently behold the land which we love with all our heart, warm affection of children, rendered a hissing and a reproach throughout the world? by the system which is already tolling the death bell of her decease among the nations? No, the events of the last 2 years have cast their dark shadows before, overclouding the bright prospects of the future, and shrouding the destinies of our country in more than a midnight gloom. And we cannot remain inactive. Our country is as dear to us as the proudest statesman, and the more closely our hearts cling to our altars and our homes, the more fervent are our aspirations that every inhabitant of our land may be protected in his fireside enjoyments by just and equal laws, that the foot of the tyrant may no longer invade the domestic sanctuary, nor his hand tear asunder those whom God himself has united by the most holy ties. Let our course then still be onward. So here, basically in the last paragraph, it's sort of like a call to action to all women. In the beginning of the paragraph, she's saying that, by sitting back and watching this happen, where women are basically saying they have no interest in the welfare of our country. They're basically watching as, the country is being destroyed from the inside. They're basically watching as, the other countries in the world are sort of looking down on America. And they're sort of watching as, their future is becoming more and more dark. And in the end, she really just calls women to action. And she's basically telling them to fight this institution of slavery from spreading any further and from doing any more damage. So with that, let's look at the questions. Number 32, Smith's main purpose in the passage is to A, accuse fellow abolitionists of overlooking the contributions that women have made to the movement. So for this choice to be right, we need to be able to point to key accusations that Smith makes, and also we need to be able to point to places where she talks about contributions women have made to the movement. And if we really think back to the passage, we really can't find any accusations. She doesn't accuse, fellow abolitionists of overlooking what women have done. And she never really talks about what women have done for the slavery movement. She's more of just calling women to action. Argue that the causes of abolition and women's rights are continuations of the spirits of the American Revolution. There really is no talk about the American Revolution and how it relates to slavery, so it can't be the right answer. C, make the case that women's rights are meaningless while slavery exists. There really is a talk about a woman's role in, fighting slavery, but she doesn't talk about how women's rights are meaningless while slavery exists. There really is no correlation that Smith makes between women's rights and slavery. D, to encourage women to see their participation in the abolitionist cause as just and important. This one makes a lot of sense because, once again, if we consider the overall theme of the passage, it seems like Smith is really pushing women to become involved in fighting slavery. And she's trying to justify that women do have a fit role in this fight against slavery. So D is the correct answer. 33, which statement provides the best description of a technique that Smith uses throughout the passage to advance her main point? So when we're looking for a technique, it's usually sort of like a literary device or something. And we have to keep in mind that a right answer must be one that is used throughout the passage. So we must see it, develop and used multiple times. She presents claims in the form of rhetorical questions that mostly have implicit negative answers, meaning that most of the rhetorical questions that she asks, the answer should be no. So first of all, do we see a lot of rhetorical questions? Well, we do see a lot of rhetorical questions because, throughout the passage, for example, starting in around line 40, and when the father, husband, son, and brother shall have left their homes to mingle in the unholy warfare, blah, 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 blah. Will the mother, wife, daughter, and sister feel that they have no interest in this subject? That's an implicit question. That's a rhetorical question, And the implicit answer is negative because, no, the mother, wife, and daughter will not just watch as, the father and the husband and the brothers go outside and fight a war. Will it be easy to convince them that there is no concern of theirs, that their homes are rendered desolate and their habitations the abodes of wretchedness? This is another rhetorical question. And again, the answer is no. Women will not stand by and watch as, their homes are destroyed. So A seems like a very logical answer so far. She criticizes her opponents by quoting self-contradictory remarks they have made. Never once does she criticize her opponents. And even if she did criticize her opponents, she doesn't point to any self-contradiction. C, she illustrates each of her central ideas with an emotionally powerful anecdote. An anecdote being, a personal story that proves a point. And we really don't see any anecdotes. She emphasizes the reasonableness of her views by presenting them as though they are universally held. This is not very true because if she was to present her views as if they were universally held, she would maybe say stuff like, it is common knowledge that blank. All women believe that blank. But she doesn't really say this. And plus, because we understand the passage that she is, calling women to action, it can likely be inferred that, her stance isn't universally held among all women. So D is wrong. 33 is A. Number 34. How does Smith develop her argument about slavery as a political question over the course of the passage? So as we were analyzing the passage, I pointed out many places where she talked about the political question. She starts it out in line 3, and she, continues to address it even in later in the passage, line 58, like around here. So obviously this is very important. She claims the designation is an outdated one and offers alternative definitions. Is it really outdated though? Does she really say in line 3 that, this question is not political because, it is outdated. It is not of this time period. No, the reasoning is not that it is outdated. So A is wrong. She dismisses the designation as too narrow. Okay, this makes sense because she says that it is not just a political question. It is too narrow to say it is just a political question, but it is also a question of justice, of humanity, of morality, of religion. So it is too narrow to say that it is just a political question, but then demonstrates its relevance to her audience. Okay, so this makes a lot of sense because if we think about it, later she really demonstrates the relevance of, the so-called quote-unquote political question of slavery by showing how it has systematically destroyed America and how important it is to, beat slavery, abolish slavery, and, restore America. So B seems like a logical answer. C, she contends that the designation has become trite and then invites her audience to revitalize it. So even if you don't know what trite means, you can kind of assume if she invites her audience to revitalize it, then maybe it gives off, the vibe that maybe the political question label is dead and she wants her audience to revitalize slavery as a sort of political question. But this doesn't really make sense in context. She describes the meaning the designation has for men and then challenges women to embrace it. She never establishes that, this is what a political question means for men, and then this is why women should challenge it. She never says this, so we can't choose D. The answer to number 34 is B. Number 35, which choice best summarizes the first paragraph? The first paragraph, if I were to summarize it before looking at the answer choices, I would say maybe she refutes the fact that slavery is a political question, and she sort of provides reasoning for why it is not a political question. Sorry. Answer choice A. Smith explains a conventional viewpoint and presents evidence supporting it. So maybe the fact that slavery is a political question is conventional, but she never supports this conventional viewpoint. So A is wrong. Smith rejects a claim. Okay, she does reject that slavery is a political question. She rejects that and elaborates on her reasons for doing so. She explains why slavery is not just a political question. So B sounds very logical. C, Smith introduces her subject and provides historical background for understanding it. Introduction, it seems very vague and sort of passive rather than, the strong rejection that she starts with. And moreover, she doesn't really provide any historical background. She sort of just refutes the point and explains why she's doing so. D, Smith identifies a problem and proposes steps to remedy it. Maybe, I guess, if you sort of think about it this way, it could be seen as a problem, saying that slavery is a political question could be, a problematic way of thinking, but she doesn't propose any steps to, sort of fix this problem, to remedy this problem. So D is wrong. 35 is B. 36, in the passage, Smith argues that it is possible for women to engage in which activity? So if you recall, when we were reading the passage, we came across this point where Smith was arguing that just because women become involved in the debate over slavery, it doesn't mean that they'll lose their feminine features. So let's see. And here we see in around lines 22, we can see this highlighted part, can take no part without losing something of their modesty and gentleness, which are her most appropriate ornaments. May not the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit exist with an upright mind and enlightened intellect? So she's basically saying that just because, women use their minds and become enlightened and join this debate over slavery, that doesn't mean that they'll lose their meek and quiet spirit. That doesn't mean they'll lose their femininity. So let's look for an answer that shows that. Acting according to humanitarian principles while preserving their femininity. This is a very accurate answer when it comes to what, we sort of talked about, because humanitarian principles, meaning fighting for slavery, fighting for people's rights, that's a humanitarian principle, while preserving their femininity. So that seems like the correct answer. B, adhering to personal morality while being politically neutral. There is no talk about political neutrality. There isn't talk about maybe how slavery pertains to being political. And there isn't talk about personal morals. There isn't talk about how women should maybe hold themselves to their own personal morals. So B is wrong. Contributing to their family's financial security. Okay, this is automatically wrong because, again, we don't really talk about financial security and how women contribute to their family's financial security. And social expectations is also wrong. Smith doesn't talk about what society thinks women's roles are. She talks about, what women she proves how women can, maintain their feminine features, while being politically active. Resisting calls for war. Okay, there really is no calls for war here, while still opposing slavery. So yeah, D is just completely irrelevant. So 36 is A. 36A, we already pointed to, lines 23 through 25, 27 through 28 as evidence as this. And we really see that choice A shows these lines 26 through 33, where she really asks the rhetorical questions, just because women are, applying their minds and being intellectual, it doesn't mean that women lose their feminine features. So A will be the correct answer for number 37. Number 38, according to Smith, the U.S. Constitution requires which action on the part of the northern free states if slave states were to revolt? If we look back in the passage, we can see that in line, starting in around line 35, by the Constitution of the United States, the whole physical power of the North is pledged or obligated for the suppression of domestic insurrections, and should the slaves, maddened by oppression, endeavor to shake off the yoke of the taskmaster, should they try to rebel against slavery, the men of the North are bound to make common cause with the tyrant. They are forced to, help the southern slave owners stop the slave rebellions. So let's look for an answer choice with that. And we sort of see that here. C is really the correct answer. The northern states would have to help the slave states fight the slave rebellion. And this question is sort of just a recall question. For these questions where there is not much, higher level thinking, you should really be able to just go back to the passage and find a sentence that sort of serves as evidence as this. In the number 39, in context, what is the main effect of Smith's use of the word tyrant in lines 40 and 83? In line 40, she says, the men of the North are bound to make common cause with the tyrant being, the slave owners of the South. And in line 80, the more fervent are our aspirations. The more fervent are our aspirations that every inhabitant of our land may be projected in his fireside enjoyment by just and equal laws, that the foot of the tyrant may no longer invade the domestic sanctuary. So the tyrant is sort of seen as this, oppressive and sort of unfair figure that sort of, one, holds slaves, and two, sort of invades domestic sanctuary. It sort of pervades into society and does bad on society. So we should be looking for a choice that shows that. It identifies a specific individual. Smith never points to a specific individual, so A is wrong. It highlights the threat of aggression from abroad. There isn't talk about how, countries overseas are going to invade us and declare war on America. No. It critiques the limited roles for women in anti-slavery movements. It really isn't about the roles of women. It's more about the oppressors and the people who are extenuating the institution of slavery. It emphasizes the unjustness of slavery. This makes a lot of sense because in the two lines, tyrant was really used in a negative light, coming into and destroying the domestic life. And also in line 40, make common cause with the tyrant that puts down every effort for the slaves to attain freedom. So this sort of paints it as unfair. So D is a pretty good answer for number 39. Question 40. As used in line 52, slumbering most nearly means. Okay, line 52, slumbering. Surely this consideration is of itself sufficient to arouse the slumbering energies of woman. Slumbering kind of means like dormant energies of woman, the untapped energies of woman. Because if we consider the context, she's sort of calling women to action here. She's saying, surely maybe if you consider this will sort of energize your energies to, overthrow slavery. It'll sort of incite women to overthrow slavery. It'll sort of motivate women to overthrow slavery, which indicates that if, this consideration will motivate women, then it kind of infers that women sort of had this untapped energy that was waiting to be unleashed. So we should look for a answer choice that says that. Lethargic. Lethargic, I think, is too much of a literal interpretation. Lethargic kind of means slumbering in the sense that, maybe they're tired, but lethargic energies doesn't really make sense. Drowsy energy is similar to lethargic. I think it's very too literal instead of taking more of the connotation into mind. Dormant energies of women makes a lot of sense because, as we were talking about how these considerations will energize the sort of previously dormant, previously untapped, previously, unused energies of women, and they'll sort of vitalize them and energize them to seek justice. Unconscious is just simply the wrong word. If you plug it in, the unconscious energies, it sort of doesn't really make sense in context. Number 41. In the passage, Smith most strongly suggests that slavery affects the United States by. So later in the passage, she talks about how, slavery here, it's unjust, obviously, headlong rage, heedless folly, nation rushing onward to destruction with slavery. The nation is headed on a downward course and rendered a hissing and reproach throughout the world. So this is sort of saying that international countries overseas are sort of looking down on America because of the situation with slavery. And that really mirrors what is talked about in choice A, lowering the country's reputation in the international community. And we can sort of see that in these lines. rendered a hissing and a reproach throughout the world. If, the rest of the world is hissing and, reproaching the actions of America and what America has done with slavery, then they're sort of, destroying their reputation in the international community. B, leading many women to disavow their allegiance to the country. It doesn't really talk about how women are pledging, loyalty to their country, causing violent conflicts in many other areas of the country. This is sort of a trap answer because, if you sort of get too far ahead of yourself and think, oh yeah, slavery does cause violence because, there's slave rebellions and stuff like that. But it isn't really explicitly stated in the article that it causes violence, and that is one of the most devastating effects of slavery. The fact that, slavery lowers the U.S.'s reputation is more explicitly stated. So A is a much more safer choice, I would say, than choice C. Weakening the authority of the country's government. The authority of the government isn't really talked about. It's more of, it's more general. Smith really talks about how the country is destroyed from inside, but she doesn't really point to a specific weakness in the government. And for that reason, choice D is wrong. And 42 is just the best evidence question for number 41. So let's just see if the lines we talked about rendered a hissing and reproach throughout the world. So we see that here, lines 68 through 73, starting shall ending nations, shall we silently behold two nations. That really includes the part that we talked about, that we pointed as evidence for number 41. So number 42 is C. And that concludes the last question on this history passage. The last passage on the October 2017 reading section, the science double passage. Passage 1 is adapted from Brian Handwork. A new antibiotic found in dirt can kill drug-resistant bacteria, 2015 by Smithsonian Institution. Passage 2 is adapted from David Livermore. This new antibiotic is cause for celebration and caution. Pathogens are acquiring resistance faster than we can introduce new antibiotics, and this is causing a human health crisis, says biochemist Kim Lewis of Northeastern University. Lewis is part of a team that recently unveiled a promising antibiotic born from a new way to tap the powers of soil microorganisms. In animal tests, tixobactin proved effective at killing off a wide variety of disease-causing bacteria, even those that have developed immunity to other drugs. So sort of the novel value that is behind tixobactin, this, new antibiotic, is that it can kill off a variety of these disease-causing bacteria, even those that have developed antibiotic resistance. The scientists' best efforts to create mutant bacteria with resistance to the drug failed, meaning tixobactin could function effectively for decades before pathogens naturally evolved resistance to it. Natural microbial substances from soil bacteria and fungi have been at the root of most antibiotic drug development during the past century, but only about 1% of these organisms can be grown in the lab. The rest, in staggering numbers, have remained uncultured and of limited use to medical science until now. So basically, they're saying that traditionally, these sorts of natural microbial substances from the soil, from fungi, from the roots of plants, have sort of been unable to be used in labs until now. Instead of trying to figure out the ideal conditions for each and every one of the millions of organisms out there in the environment to allow them to grow in the lab, we simply grow them in their natural environment where they already have the conditions they need for growth. So basically, this article is basically saying, instead of creating the conditions that, these antibiotics or whatever need to grow in the lab, why don't we just grow them out in nature where they naturally will already have the resources that they need to grow? To do this, the team designed a gadget that sandwiches a soil sample between two membranes, each perforated with pores that allow molecules like nutrients to diffuse through, but won't allow the passage of cells. We just use it to trick the bacteria into thinking that they are in their natural environment, Lewis says. The team isolated 10,000 strains of uncultured soil bacteria and prepared extracts from them that could be tested against nasty pathogenic bacteria. Tixobactin emerged as the most promising drug. Mice infected with bacteria that cause upper respiratory tract infections were treated with tixobactin, and the drug knocked out the infections with no noticeable toxic effects. It is likely that tixobactin is effective because of the way it targets disease. So this is the reason why it's effective. The drug breaks down bacterial cell walls by attacking the lipid molecules that the cell creates organically. Many other antibiotics target the bacteria's proteins, and the genes that encode those proteins can mutate to produce different structures. So we see that in the end of the passage, the first passage is really revealing how sort of versatile tixobactin is. It is, immune to resistance, and also it changes and it evolves according to what function it needs to serve. Passage 2. Many good antibiotic families, penicillin, streptomycin, tetracycline, come from soil fungi and bacteria, and it has long been suspected that if we could grow more types of bacteria from soil or from exotic environments such as deep oceans, then we might find new natural antibiotics. In a recent study, researchers Kim Lewis and others found that they could isolate and grow individual soil bacteria, including types that can't normally be grown in the laboratory, in soil itself, which supplied critical nutrients and minerals. Once the bacteria reached a critical mass, they could be transferred to the lab and their cultivation continued. This simple and elegant methodology is the most important finding to my mind. So this passage is basically saying that, the uses of tixobactin isn't really as important as sort of this methodology that it was sort of harvested and discovered and used. For it opens a gateway to cultivating a wealth of potentially antibiotic-producing bacteria that have never been grown before. The first new antibiotic that they found by this approach, tixobactin from a bacterium called Eleftheria terrae, is less exciting to my mind, though it doesn't look bad. So passage 2 doesn't really take as positive of a light on tixobactin as passage 1 does. Tixobactin killed gram-positive bacteria such as S. aureus in the laboratory and cured experimental infection in mice. Okay, so this is kind of repeating studies that we already talked about in passage 1. It also killed the tuberculosis bacterium, which is important because there is a real problem with resistant tuberculosis in the developing world. So passage 2 does admit that tixobactin could be of use in killing, bacteria and, resistant tuberculosis. So diseases that have already developed resistances. This could be a possible use for tixobactin. It was also difficult to select tixobactin resistance. So what are my caveats? What are sort of the negative aspects that I see with tixobactin? Because sort of in this paragraph, starting in line 69, he sort of talked about how tixobactin is a promising discovery, how it might be good. So now he wants to talk about his caveats, his drawbacks, the negative aspects. Well, I see 3. So he sees 3 negative aspects with this new discovery. First, tixobactin isn't a potential panacea. It doesn't kill the gram-negative opportunists, as it is too big to cross their complex cell wall. So the first issue with this new antibiotic, tixobactin, is that while it can kill gram-positive bacteria, it can't kill gram-negative ones because it's too big. Secondly, scaling to commercial manufacture will be challenging since the bacteria making the antibiotic are so difficult to grow. So it's difficult to scale this into, a widely used and widely sold antibiotic because the bacteria itself that makes the antibiotic is so difficult to grow, to reproduce, and to sell. And thirdly, it's early days yet. As with any antibiotic, tixobactin now faces the long haul of clinical trials. Phase 1 to see what dose you can safely give the patient, Phase 2 to see if it cures infections, and Phase 3 to compare its efficacy to that of standard of care treatment. That is going to take 5 years and 500 million, and these are numbers we must find ways to reduce while not compromising safety if we're to keep ahead of bacteria, which can evolve far more swiftly and cheaply. So basically, the third caveat that the author found was that it's sort of developing this into a wide-scale sort of cure is too hard because it has to pass too many clinical trials. It has to, get accepted by doctors, by medical professionals, by whatever. So now let's move on to the questions. Number 43, the first paragraph of passage 1 primarily serves to. So the first paragraph, pathogens are acquiring resistance faster than we can introduce new antibiotics. So sort of, if I were to put this in my own words, I would say the first paragraph proposes a problem, because while we had cures for such diseases for a long time, they're sort of becoming resistant to the cures that we normally had. So that's sort of a problem that is becoming more and more prevalent in the world. And if we consider, how the first paragraph fits in with the rest of the passage 1, we can sort of see that this problem that is presented in the first paragraph is sort of solved by the rest of the passage, because the rest of the passage starts talking about, the new discovery that maybe can solve some of these antibiotic resistant bacteria. So A, present a claim that is supported and developed over the course of the passage. There is no claim that is being presented in passage 1. It just sort of brings up a problem. It doesn't present a claim. B, introduce a controversy. This immediately strikes me as wrong, because a controversy is, as you know, something that is like an argument, something that has two sides that are at odds. Maybe they disagree over a certain topic, and we really don't see that in the first paragraph. We see a worldwide problem, something that's definitely a problem. There's no controversy over whether or not bacteria are developing resistance. So B is wrong. Identify a problem that the research discussed in the passage may help to address. This seems like exactly what we've been talking about, because again, the problem is the antibiotic resistance, and the research discussed later in the passage may help, because teixobactin may help to cure some of these diseases that were affected by antibiotic resistant bacteria. D, offer a theory that is challenged by the findings presented in the passage. First of all, the findings in the passage sort of solve, or they sort of help, they sort of support the issue that is brought up in passage 1. It doesn't really challenge it. And it really isn't a theory that is presented in the first paragraph, so that's wrong. Number 44, the author of passage 1 suggests that an advantage of the method Lewis's team used to grow the microorganisms is that. So really the part we should be talking about is the part where they talked about here. We simply grow them in their natural environment where they already have the conditions they need to grow. So basically, if we look at, this is starting here instead of trying to, this is the part where they talk about their research methods, but we also have to consider the context. But only about 1% of these organisms can be grown in a lab. The rest, in staggering numbers, have remained uncultured and of limited use to medical science until now. So we see that by reading the context, we see that the research methods that Lewis has used has really allowed, researchers, has allowed scientists to make use of this thing that they haven't been able to use until now. So let's look for an answer choice. A, identifies the requirements for soil bacteria. It doesn't really list off the requirements that bacteria need to grow. It doesn't say, oh, number 1 requirement, it needs light. Number 2 requirement, it needs water. This doesn't really take place in this passage, so A is wrong. B, enables soil bacteria to take in more nutrients. It doesn't say that this method of study allows soil bacteria to, take in more nutrients and to grow better, so that's wrong. Directly affects the cell walls of okay, so we again see no reference to cell walls. This is just too specific of an answer choice. We can't really choose this answer choice with confidence because it isn't backed up by the passage. Allows researchers to make use of soil bacteria that they had previously been unable to exploit. So this I really like, because previously unable to exploit really goes along with what's said in the passage. The fact that, the rest of the bacteria had been limited use to medical science until now. So that sort of goes along with the fact that scientists had been previously unable to exploit this until, Lewis's team came out with this method of research. And 45 goes along with number 44. It's just the best evidence choice. And we can see that the lines that we pointed to, sort of lines 20, starting lines 18 around the rest in staggering numbers, ending until now, is actually an answer choice. It's answer choice A. 45. The author of passage 2 would most likely agree with which statement about the development of teixobactin? It reveals that some antibiotics are effective against gram-negative bacteria. That seems really contradictory because, as we talked about, gram-negative opportunists, this is from passage 2, by the way, gram-negative opportunists, it doesn't kill as it is too big, so it isn't really effective, so A is wrong. It shows that conventional methods can still yield new types of antibiotics. Well, obviously, this is sort of at odds with what passage 2 talked about, because passage 2 sort of talks about growing bacteria from soil, exotic environments, deep oceans. If passage 2 talks about the fact that we have to go to such odds to find these sort of bacterias, it wouldn't really agree that conventional methods can still yield new types of bacteria, because the passage already is talking about these unconventional methods, which leads to inference that conventional methods maybe won't yield new types of antibiotics. So B is a wrong answer. It casts doubt on the practicality of searching for new antibiotics in exotic environments. Cast doubt, does it really say, oh, searching for antibiotics in these environments is bad? No, it doesn't really say that, because, again, passage 2 acknowledges that scientists are now coming to the conclusion that they must, find new bacteria from more exotic, more deep ocean environments. So it doesn't really cast doubt on these new methods. D, it confirms a long-held belief about a potential source for antibiotics. So does it really confirm a long-held belief? Let's look in the passage. The first thing that points to this answer is this phrase, long been suspected. It sort of points to a long-held belief. So if we read, many good antibiotic families, penicillin, streptomycin, tetracycline, come from soil and bacteria, and has been long suspected that we could grow more types of bacteria from soil, from exotic environments such as deep oceans, that we might find new natural antibiotics in these types of areas. So the development, the discovery of teixobactin sort of does confirm this long-held belief, because once again, it points to sort of the long been suspected thing that passage 2 talks about. As used in line 79, caveats most nearly means. So I actually explained this as we analyzed the passage, and I mentioned how caveats meant sort of drawbacks. If we consider sort of the transition between this passage starting on line 69 and the passage starting on line 79, the first passage is talking about some of the benefits of teixobactin, but the second paragraph talks about sort of some of the drawbacks. So some of the caveats, this sort of transitions. The caveats are some things that are maybe drawbacks, some flaws, some misgivings, stuff like that. So the answer to number 47 is misgivings, because it works in context, and the definition of the word matches well with how caveats is used in the original sentence. Question 48. In the last sentence of passage 2, the author uses the phrase 5 years and 500 million, primarily to. That's going to take 5 years and 500 million, and these numbers are numbers we must try to reduce. So basically, the author is saying, look, the development of teixobactin isn't really realistic, because it's going to take a long time and it's going to take a lot of money. So in saying 5 years and 500 million, the author is saying that this development will take a lot of effort, a lot of resources to be a good product. A, to emphasize the scale of the effort needed to make teixobactin available for consumer use. Yeah, this seems like exactly what we talked about, because the emphasis on the number of years and the amount of money it takes to develop teixobactin does emphasize how much effort and resources are needed to make it available. Criticize the level of funding that the government has committed to teixobactin development. 500 million, there is really no criticism here. The author does say we should be looking to reduce this, but he doesn't really, criticize the level of funding that the government specifically has committed to this, so B is wrong. Underscore the amount of time and money that has already been spent researching teixobactin. Well, to sort of consider if this answer choice is right or wrong, we have to consider the context of the 5 years, 500 million. 5 years, 500 million is sort of looking into the future. It isn't really talking about how much has already been spent. It's looking at how much we need to put into it to sort of develop teixobactin into a consumer product. So C is wrong because it sort of deals with teixobactin as a thing in the past rather than a thing of the future. Choice D, compare the amount of money spent developing teixobactin with the amount developing other antibiotics. There is really no comparison. It's really just one number, and it only involves teixobactin, not other antibiotics. So choice D is wrong. So 48 is A. Number 49, which choice best describes the relationship between passage 1 and passage 2? So without looking at the answers, I can already tell that passage 1 sort of is more, optimistic that passage about the uses of teixobactin, while passage 2 is sort of more reserved. But at the same time, passage 2 sort of evaluates sort of how significant the research in passage 1 was, because passage 1 sort of just talks about the research and it talks about maybe some possible applications, but passage 2 really takes a logical standpoint and it really considers is teixobactin, this new discovery, is it really beneficial to humans, and is it really worth it to pursue? So let's see. A, passage 2 offers an evaluation of the significance of the research discussed in passage 1. This sounds like what we talked about, because passage 2 really considers, is teixobactin a worthwhile development, a worthwhile investment for the world to be investing in, even if it, costs 5 years, 500 million, stuff like that. So A seems like a very logical choice. Passage 2 suggests a modification to the methodology described in passage 1. Well, the methodology described in passage 1 talks about the way the authors found the new bacteria. And if I recall in passage 2, they say in line 64 that this methodology is simple and elegant, and it's very important. It doesn't really offer a modification, so B is wrong. Passage 2 uses concrete examples to illustrate concepts considered in passage 1. Passage 2 really doesn't point to any concrete examples at all. If we saw some concrete examples, it would be stuff like scientific studies, maybe news, maybe some historical facts about the developments of antibiotics and stuff in the past. So there's no concrete examples provided, so C is wrong. Passage 2 takes a dismissive stance regarding the findings mentioned in passage 1. Passage 2 sort of, in a way, it does take a dismissive stance because, again, the author did find some caveats with the discovery of teixobactin, but it isn't really the best description of the overall relationship between passage 1 and passage 2. Saying that passage 2 takes a dismissive stance is too negative, because passage 2 still finds a lot of value in the discoveries of passage 1. Again, pointing back to this line, they say that the methodology in which teixobactin was found was simple and elegant and is a very good methodology and should be used in the future. So D is wrong. Number 50, both passages make the point that teixobactin could be useful in A, standardizing the future development of antibiotics produced in laboratory environments. When we talk about standardizing, we kind of infer that it means that maybe teixobactin would be used as a model for future antibiotics to be produced in the laboratory. And we really don't see that any of the passages, quite frankly, talking about how teixobactin should be used as a model to develop new antibiotics. So this standardizing factor isn't really there, so A is wrong. B, combating infections that are no longer responding to treatment with other antibiotics. This seems like a very logical answer because if we look back in passage 1, it talks about killing, the tuberculosis strands that still have, this is actually in passage 2. Passage 2 talks about, in line 75, resistant tuberculosis. Teixobactin, could be good in combating like such infections that have developed antibiotic resistance. And passage 1 also shows this because it shows that, in the mice that had the upper respiratory tract infection, it did knock out the infections with no noticeable toxic effects. So, yeah. So B seems like a logical answer for number 50. C, controlling the spread of pathogenic soil fungi. Soil fungi isn't really talked about a lot in either of the passages. Passage 1 talks about the respiratory tract infection in mice. Passage 2 more talks about tuberculosis. So C is wrong. Shaping a new method of studying the effectiveness of antibiotics. Well, passage 2 and passage 1 both talk about, sort of this new method being a good method, but this new method of studying the effectiveness of antibiotics, the method that they talked about isn't really about studying the effectiveness of antibiotics. The method that's talked about in the two passages is more about how antibiotics are being discovered, how they're being cultivated in labs, not studies about how effective they are. So D is wrong. 50 is B. Number 51. Information in the passage 2 best supports which conclusion about the mice in the experiment described in passage 1. So in passage 1, let's see. Mice infected with the bacteria that cause upper respiratory tract infections. So Teixobactin was able to knock out these infections in mice. In passage 2, when it talks about Teixobactin, it says that Teixobactin is able to knock out, it is able to kill gram-positive bacteria. So maybe we can possibly make the assumption that this tract infection was caused by a gram-positive bacteria. Exposure to Teixobactin make them less susceptible to subsequent upper respiratory tract infections. So subsequent meaning following. So there isn't really an indication to this in passage 2. It doesn't say that, if Teixobactin is used to treat upper respiratory tract infections, it is less likely to occur again. It doesn't really say this, so A is wrong. B, gram-positive bacteria enhance the effectiveness of Teixobactin against their upper respiratory tract infections. So gram-positive bacteria enhances Teixobactin. I thought passage 2 was talking about how Teixobactin, works well against gram-positive bacteria and kills it. Gram-positive bacteria, according to passage 2 at least, doesn't enhance the effectiveness of Teixobactin. So choice B can't be right. C, the upper respiratory tract infections were likely not caused by gram-negative bacteria. So let's sort of refresh ourselves on what passage 2 said about gram-negative bacteria. So here in line 80, it doesn't kill the gram-negative opportunists as it is too big to cross their complex cell wall. So passage 2 says that Teixobactin isn't able to kill gram-negative opportunists. And passage 1 already said that Teixobactin was able to, kill the bacteria that caused the infection in mice. So passage 2, as we can infer would most likely support the conclusion that the bacteria that caused the infection in mice wasn't gram-negative because Teixobactin was effective at killing that bacteria. So C is a correct answer. Teixobactin attacked the proteins of the bacteria that caused their upper respiratory tract infections. Passage 2 never points to how specifically Teixobactin, attacks bacteria. It just says that Teixobactin, kills the bacteria. It doesn't talk about how it attacked the proteins. It doesn't talk about the methods that Teixobactin attacks the bacteria. So D is wrong. 51 is C. 52, best evidence choice. So to go over the answer choice that we made in number 51, their upper respiratory tract infections were likely not caused by gram-negative bacteria. So to prove this, to provide evidence for this, we would want, sort of an explanation for why teixobactin isn't able to kill gram-negative bacteria. So if we look towards the end of passage 2, we see that it doesn't kill the gram-negative opportunists as it is too big to cross their complex cell wall. So that is in lines around 80, and we see that this is answer choice D. So 52 is D. So that concludes the analysis of all the reading passages, as well as the review of all the reading questions.
Hey guys, I'm going to be reviewing the writing section for the October 2017 test today. So I'm just going to give a brief summary of each passage and then give my explanation for the correct answers for each question. So yeah, we're going to add timestamps later, and hopefully if you have any questions that you need help with after taking this test, you can look at these recordings and just figure out what you need to work on, and yeah. So I'm going to get right into it. So this first passage, questions 1 through 11, is titled Survival in the Hostile Environment of NW Rota 1. So this one's basically about an undersea volcano and about different environmental conditions down there and different species that live there. So this just talks about the species and how they have adapted to survive in these difficult conditions. So the first question. The correct answer for this one is just going to be B, watch. So if you can see here, 1, it says watch and observe. Watch and observe have pretty much the same meaning, so I think it's redundant to have both of them. So if you just read it through with watch substituted at 1, it says allowing scientists to watch them up close via remotely operated vehicles. It makes the most sense just to say watch because if you look at the other choices, observe to see, visually watch, or A, no change, those are just all redundant. So 2, this is a sentence sequencing question. So it says to make the paragraph most logical, sentence 5 should be placed where it is now, after sentence 1, after sentence 2, or after sentence 3. So let's read sentence 5. You can see that it starts with at that depth. So this kind of tells you that it's going to be after a sentence that discusses a certain depth. So we'll just look at question 1. It says 60 miles north of Guam and more than 1,700 feet under the ocean surface. So that looks like it discusses depth right there. So we're going to say that it goes after sentence 1, which is B, which is the correct answer. All right, 3. So it's far below the ocean's photic zone where sunlight drives photosynthesis. Nevertheless, bacteria supporting a unique food web have adapted to this perpetually dark environment. So the first part of this sentence talks about how photosynthesis is not available because this volcano is so far underwater. Yet the second part of the sentence talks about how bacteria supporting the food web have adapted to the dark environment. So we can see here for 3, this should be a word that kind of has a similar meaning to despite or however. So if you look at the choices afterward, furthermore, and similarly, none of them have a meaning that quite matches what needs to be in the sentence as nevertheless does. So the answer here is A, no change. So number 4, this is pretty simple, just pronoun reference. See, the bacteria have evolved to use hydrogen sulfide instead of sunlight for the energy that drives their metabolic processes, and hydrothermal venting is the source of the chemical soup necessary to support them, which is correct because it refers to multiple things, as there's many bacteria, not just one, so which disqualifies B and D, one and it. But him or her is not something we use to talk about bacteria, generally only for people. All right. So 5. I'm going to start at the middle of the sentence here. And the heat drives chemical reactions that remove oxygen sulfates and remove other chemicals from the water. So it says before oxygen, it already says remove. Therefore, remove is not needed here in 5. So you can take out or you can eliminate A, B, and C because they're kind of just restating remove. So yeah, the only logical answer is D right here. Okay. So for 6, the answer here is C. All you have to do is look earlier in the sentence where it says shrimp dash originally thought to exist only around an undersea volcano near Hawaii. And there should be a dash after this because dashes come in pairs just to separate the thought in the middle of it from the rest of the sentence. So C is the correct answer. All right, so 7. Which choice most effectively sets up the information in the next sentence? So it says shrimp of that species also graze on bacterial filaments as juveniles, resulting from their ability to cope with the noxious environment around the volcano. So it asks for the choice setting up the information in the next sentence. And the next sentence says they feed on the loihi shrimp and other organisms that are overcome by the toxic plumes of volcanic gas and ash. So the next sentence talks about their feeding behavior and how they've become predators. So how shrimp of um, the other species have become predators. So the most logical choice here is D, which says, but as adults, the claws are large enough for the shrimp to be predators. So the fact that the claws are large enough as adults sets up the information that they are then able to eat other shrimp and other organisms. All right, so number 8 right now. During an underwater eruption, steam quickly condenses. The steam leaves only carbon dioxide bubbles and droplets of molten sulfur. So there's not really a need for 2 sentences here because the second sentence starts with the steam. However, steam is said just a few words before. So the most concise combination of these 2 sentences is A. During an underwater eruption, steam quickly condenses and leaves only carbon dioxide bubbles and droplets of molten sulfur. All the other choices are just they're just too wordy for this. So yeah, you just want to choose the one that's the most concise. All right, number 9. Um, this means that the water near NW Rota 1 is more acidic than that of stomach acid. So when it says than that of stomach acid, that kind of implies that stomach acid has water because it means that the water is more acidic than the water of stomach acid. So that doesn't really make sense. Um, if you look at the other choices, the water is more acidic than those of stomach acid. That doesn't make sense either. Number C definitely doesn't make sense because it says the acid from stomach acid, which is redundant. So it's the right answer is D. This means that the water is more acidic than stomach acid, which is the most concise choice and still makes sense. All right, number 10. As the carbon dioxide level in Earth's atmosphere rises, the world's oceans absorb more carbon dioxide. So here it's just a matter of where to place these apostrophes. So the world's oceans, it's the world should be or worlds should be possessive because it's the oceans of the world. However, oceans should not be possessive. It's just a plural. Therefore, the correct answer right here is C, which is world apostrophe S oceans no apostrophe. The other ones don't make sense. Okay, number 11. The writer's considering revising the underlined portion to the following. So it'll say absorb more carbon dioxide, which increases their acidity. So should the writer make this revision here? The answer is A. Yes, it does. It explains the relevance of this sentence to the point made in the paragraph. So the sentence right before talks about how the water near this underwater volcano is very acidic and how it says it presents a challenge to life forms living nearby. So the fact that the writer is including the part about how absorbing more carbon dioxide increases ocean acidity, that does contribute to the main point because it talks about, or it kind of, it supports the point that the absorption of carbon dioxide is going to make life more difficult for these ocean organisms. All right, so we'll move on to the next passage, free public transportation. So this one just talks about how one solution proposed to like lots of traffic and just congested roads is making public transportation free. However, this paragraph or this passage talks about how free public transportation is not the correct answer because it barely reduces the amount of cars on the road, and it costs a lot more for governments to run. So with that said, we'll get into the questions here. All right. So 12, the answer is C. So while fare-free policies do increase ridership, they have not been found to be an effective way to address traffic problems. That's the best way to say it. Um, Having the after ridership is just unnecessary, and the other ones either are too wordy or use improper punctuation, such as a semicolon, which is not supposed to be used there. Okay, 13. Not surprisingly, public transportation is used by more people when people do not have to pay a fare. So that's a little, the wording is a little, it's a little too wordy right there. So we're just going to look at the other choices. Not surprisingly, more people use public transportation if they do not have to pay a fare. This one is the best, B is the best answer. It's the correct one, just because it says the same point as the other ones, yet it's the most clear and efficient way of saying it. If you look at the other ones, they're just too wordy. They'll either repeat information or, just be overly wordy. A lot of these problems like this, you just choose the one that's the least wordy, yet still makes sense. All right, 14. Okay, so this one is just punctuation. The answer here is B, declined with a colon. So car use in Tallinn has only slightly declined. As a 2014 study by the Royal Institute of Technology. So a colon is the best choice here because it combines two independent clauses. The first one being car use in Tallinn has only slightly declined. The second one being a 2014 study by the Royal Institute found that car traffic in Tallinn was down less than 3%. So if you put a comma here, that would make this a run-on sentence. A semicolon doesn't work here because they're both independent clauses. And if you were to do answer choice D, just end the sentence there and say, as a 2014 study found, that's just, the second sentence is just a fragment, so the best choice is B. Okay, 15. So this one is a pronoun reference problem. So the correct answer is D, the policy here. So um, a 2014 study by the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden found that car traffic in Tallinn was down less than 3% since it was enacted. So it makes sense if you know that it is referring to the policy. However, it could also refer to the study by the KTH Royal Institute of Technology. So the best choice here is to just say D, the policy. If you try the other ones, it doesn't really make sense. Yeah, just get some practice with those. I'll go over this in a lesson later. So this one, instituting a fare-free system, and 16 here says which choice best introduces the paragraph. So the paragraph here talks about how cities are going to lose a lot of funding because people aren't going to pay fares anymore. So it just talks about how it's a lot more difficult to operate public transportation when fares are zero. So if you look at all these choices, A, no change is actually the best, just because it is the only one that actually directly talks about how a fare-free system affects the city's budget. Okay, 17. Advocates of fare-free policies claim that the costs of these policies are largely offset by various savings. However, a recent study, so however here is not really necessary because C, but it has a pretty much the same meaning. However, with one less comma, it's less wordy. So if you just have to substitute in there and compare it to however to see which one's the better choice, and the best choice is C. The other ones do not make sense because yeah, they don't have the right conjunction. But or however makes the most sense. However, it is but that is the most efficient and I guess best way to say it. Okay, so 18. This is just a word choice here. So different cities found this outlook to be way too sunny. So way too sunny is like really informal tone right here. So if you look at the choices, it should just be one that's like, professional and formal. So looking too much on the bright side and pretty upbeat are both kind of informal too, just like way too sunny. So the best choice here is D, overly optimistic. Okay. So 19C, which choice provides an accurate interpretation of the chart? So in this sentence, it's talking about San Francisco's public transportation system. So it says 19 here says, create a deficit of 72 million per year in lost fares. So this is asking you to give one that provides an accurate interpretation of the chart. So if you can look at the chart, it says Muni, San Francisco, California. So if you look back at 19, it says a deficit of 72 million in lost fares. However, here you can see that 72 million is the cost of adding service, and 112 million is actually the cost in lost fares. So A is not correct. No, it's not no change because that is an inaccurate interpretation of the chart. So the correct answer here is C, but result in a total increase of 184 million per year in operating costs, because B and D say it saves an additional X amount of money, but this fare-free public transportation does not save the city money. It actually it costs them money by increasing the operating costs. So yeah, C, the correct answer. Okay, so the writer is considering adding the following sentence based on information from the chart. So, by contrast, lane transit in Eugene, Oregon would lose only 5 million in fares if it instituted a fare-free system. So this sentence is kind of the purpose of this sentence is to say that, like, fare-free transportation is actually not that bad. It doesn't lead to substantial loss for governments. But the purpose of this passage is to say that fare-free public transportation is bad for governments and it causes a lot of money. So C is the correct answer. No, the sentence should not be added because it doesn't support the argument. Okay, 21. The correct answer here is B. Some college towns and resort communities embrace the model because buses can go faster when drivers do not have to collect fares. So you just this has the correct verb tense. Yeah, this one just takes practice. I'm not really sure how to explain it well, but if you read it through with all the choices, B makes the most sense. So 22, your last question of the passage. For large cities looking to reduce automobile traffic, though, research about Tallinn, Estonia could be instructive. This looks like it's not the right answer because the passage is not talking about just this one city in Estonia, but how fare-free public transportation is not like a valid solution to automobile traffic. So let's just look at the choices here. Subways will prove to be more important than buses. No, this was not talking about subways versus buses. It was just talking about public transportation where no one has to pay. So that's not the correct answer. And it's between C and D. You can see that D is the best choice because it says fare-free public transportation is not the answer, which is the main point of the passage. And C cannot be or it might make sense, but it's not the correct answer because the passage does not talk about lowering costs for public transportation. It just talks about how if it's free, that's not good for governments. Okay, so here's the next passage. Wet plate photography, an old technique makes a new splash. So this one is just talking about wet plate photography versus digital photography, and it mostly talks about like the process of wet plate photography, which is a pretty old photography technique. Okay, so 23. Upon the arrival of the digital camera, professional photographers harumphed that they produced ugly, low resolution images. So 23 here should be a pronoun that refers to the digital camera. So earlier in the sentence, it says upon the arrival of the digital camera. It doesn't say the arrival of digital cameras, which would make they the correct answer. So it's not a no change. And because it says the digital camera, it's specific, so it can't be C1. And since it's referring to the camera, it's not D, he or she, because cameras don't have a gender. So the correct answer here is just B, it. Okay, 24. The writer plans to add the following sentence to this paragraph. Why wouldn't they? So to make this paragraph most logical, the sentence should be placed after. The correct answer here is B, after sentence 2. So it says, yet eventually the vast majority of them traded film for megapixels. Why wouldn't they? The latest digital cameras take pictures so crisp. So basically, why wouldn't they is it makes the most sense after sentence 2 because it's like, why wouldn't photographers trade film for megapixels? And then the next sentence follows up, why wouldn't they, with reasons why it's like an obvious choice to move to digital cameras. Okay, next to sentence 25. So at this point, the writer is considering adding the following sentence. It's also labor intensive, involving several intricate steps. So B is the correct answer. If you look at the sentence before 25, it says the process can be dangerous given that it requires the use of several volatile chemicals. And this should be added because saying that it's also labor intensive sets up the paragraph's description of how photographers have to arrange their subjects, mix all these toxic chemicals, and if you can see here, develop it quickly. So, yeah, it makes the most sense to add this. Okay, to take a wet plate photograph, photographers usually first arrange or pose there, which is D. So this is possessive, but it's a plural possessive as well because it's not one photographer's subject; it's the subjects of many photographers. So the best choice is D. Okay, so 27. Dried collodion is unusable. So once the photo is snapped, um, right here you can just like substitute them all because it's a pretty simple question. Dried collodion is unstable, but once the photo is snapped, so is the best choice here. A, which is no change, because dried collodion is unstable. So relates the remark about dried collodion being, or sorry, unusable. I'm not reading this right. Dried collodion is unusable. So once the photo is snapped, the photographer has very little time to develop it. So just makes the most sense here. Okay, 28. So the writer wants to emphasize how quickly wet plate photographers have to work. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal? So the best choice here is D, mirror, because it is the choice that it maintains the style of the paragraph, yet also, kind of gets the point across that there's very little time. So if the photographer has nominal minutes, nominal is something that's not really used to describe an amount of time. It's generally used to describe something that's like, has very little actual meaning or value. So that doesn't make sense here. So it says the photographer has a few minutes to develop it. A few is like, that's not really a good thing to say here because a few is kind of just casual and it could mean like they have like 5-6 minutes. That sounds like a good amount of time. So if it says the photographer has a matter of minutes, that also doesn't really emphasize, how it's like very few minutes. So D, mirror is the best choice. Okay, so 29. The best choice here is B, finally, because it's just describing the last step of the process of developing these images. In conclusion is providing a conclusion to like an argument before, so that's not the best answer because this is just a process. Okay, so 30. The best answer here is D. So it is coated with lavender oil to give it a protective finish. There's no parentheses needed, no dash, no comma, just, yeah, no punctuation here. It makes the most sense. Okay, so question 31. The best choice here is A, no change. So if B, C, and D are all past tense, yet this isn't really talking about like a picture that was taken. It's just talking about, like the imperfections in wet plate photographs. So it's just present tense makes the most sense here, which is A, no change. Okay. So 32. This is a pretty long sentence, so yeah. We'll read the sentence before it to get some context. Since the film requires long exposures, moving subjects blur. A shifting arm or leg might even disappear because of the lengthy exposure time required. So it's definitely unnecessary to say the lengthy exposure time required because this sentence right before just says the film requires long exposures. So no change is not the best choice. And if you go through all these options, D is just the best choice because it doesn't have redundancy with long exposure time. It just gets straight to the point, and yeah, it's just the best option. Okay, so 33. The writer wants to highlight the contrast between the Sternbach's techniques and the people's Sternbach photographs. So Joni Sternbach is a wet plate photographer, and this passage it already established that this method of photography is it's pretty old, and yeah, it's pretty obsolete now with digital cameras. But it says her subjects could be 19th century wave riders, so that's pretty good because um, her photographs, which are made with wet plate photography, kind of they just give a feeling that like the picture's older than it is. So A, no change makes the best or the most sense because it talks about how like even though the subjects in her pictures are modern, they look like they might have come from the 1800s just because of the method used. Okay. So on to our last passage, digging up cities. This one just talks about what an urban archaeologist is and how they like go through construction sites to find artifacts. Okay. So 34. The writer is considering revising the underlying portion to the following. So we're going to read the sentence that 34 is located in and add um, the revision that the writer is considering. So Luria, an urban archaeologist, studies the history of cities by excavating artifacts that have accumulated over centuries of land development. So this is good because I think yes, this should be added because it gives a good description of what an urban archaeologist is, and the best choice here for 34 is A because it sets up the rest of the passage by explaining, the role of an urban archaeologist. Okay. So 35. Any New York City construction project using municipal funds is required to consider whether historical artifacts will be affected. So C is the best choice. It can't be have been because they have to consider whether artifacts will be affected before or this consideration has to be made before construction, not after. So B and D are not correct because these are both past tense. So C is just the best choice. So 36, if that possibility exists or is possible, you don't need is possible here because possibility exists gets the point across. Is possible is just redundant. So the correct answer here for 36 is D. This one just gets right to the point. Okay. So as the work continued, though, the team faced obstacles. So B is the best choice right here because um, yeah, you just have to go through these honestly, and though makes the best choice. I'll be giving a lecture later about this type of question, but for now, you kind of just have to read through it and find which one makes the most sense. Okay, 38. So the best choice here is D. The archaeology team's work is periodically halted by stormy weather. You don't need any punctuation in there. Halted with no punctuation. D is the best choice. Okay, so 39. They had to contend with the noise of construction vehicles, car horns, and pedestrians' noise. Pedestrians' noise is redundant. You can just say C, pedestrians is the best choice because the noise of construction vehicles, car horns, and pedestrians on the busy New York City streets. Okay, so we are on number 40 here. Okay. In August 2013, the archaeologists discovered thousands of objects in a single 15-foot stretch that was likely a garbage disposal site, comma, including buttons from Revolutionary War uniforms. So, C, comma, including is the best way to combine these two sentences. D with a semicolon that's not the best choice because a semicolon is inappropriate in this context. It should just be a comma. Okay, 41. So the team's discoveries provided a snapshot of. So this asks for the choice that most effectively sets up the example discussed in the next sentence. So the next sentence talks about how New Yorkers were trying to get fresh drinking water and laid wooden pipes and dug wells to do this. So this relates best to C, public utility planning and infrastructure development, because water is a public utility. And yeah, the other ones just are not really related to the next sentence. So 42, which choice best maintains the style and tone of the passage? A, no change is the best answer because blood, sweat, and tears, hassle, and feats of strength and fortitude are both they're all too dramatic for this passage. Effort is a that's a good word for this. So yeah, you just have to consider the connotations of the word, and yeah, all the other ones are just too extreme for this context. All right, only two questions left. Through such discoveries, they tell the story of a city's history in a new way. So they is very unclear, but we know that it's referring to these urban archaeologists, so D is the correct answer. So 44. The writer wants to conclude the passage with a quote that illustrates the broad impact of the team's work. So, one of my favorite things is putting together someone's life. That doesn't really, that's not the best representation of the work that urban archaeologists do. So, we're just going to look at the other choices. New York City construction has a lot of stops and starts, not related at all to their work. Finding the bits and pieces that were actually used by the people in the past makes New York City's history real. So this is the best choice, C, because it talks about how looking through construction sites and finding artifacts that helps bring New York City's history to life, and that's the best choice to describe how the urban archaeologists how their work is important.
Hello, my name is Vignesh, and this is gonna be section number 3 of the math no calculator section for the October 2017 exam. Let's start off with number 1. For a system of equations above, what is the value of x plus y? So for this, let's first let's say I'm gonna say the first one is equation number 1, and the second one is equation number 2. So what is the value of x plus y? Well, the easiest way for doing it, I'm gonna solve for x and y. So first I'm gonna solve for y first. So I'm gonna do 2x minus y equals 8. And I'm gonna multiply equation 2 by 2, like the whole equation. I can do that because I have to multiply both sides. So this is gonna be 2x plus 4y equals 8. Subtract both. The 8's cancel out, the 2x's cancel out. You get negative 5y equals 0. so y equals 0. And then you plug that into equation number 1. 2x minus 0 equals 8. And x will equal 4. So 4 plus 0 is 4, and choice is B. Number 2, which of the following is equivalent to 2 times blah, blah, blah. So for this one, just distribute it out. Just for some of these, I may not show the quickest way because obviously you can do some of these in your mind. But I'm going to explain it out so that you guys can, like, some of those that don't, like, so everyone gets a good explanation. So this one's I'm going to distribute it out. 2x squared minus 2x plus 3x squared minus 3x. And then that would be 5x squared minus 5x. A. As I said in the first math lecture series, the first couple questions are the easier ones, and as you go like along the test, it gets harder and harder. So that's kind of obvious from like number 2, which is actually pretty simple. Number 3, you have this equation. You want to see what is true about it. So easier to do this is to put it in y equals mx plus b form. So that would be 2y equals, I'm adding 3x to both sides, minus 4 divided by 2 equals 3 over 2x minus 2, sorry, equals 2. Okay, it has a negative y-intercept and a positive slope. That's answer choice D. Okay, number 4, the front of a roller coaster car. Okay, I'm not gonna read over each question because I'm assuming you guys did these. But yeah, so I'll just hit on like anything that's important. So what we know, so it's 15 feet above the ground. But you guys should read out the whole question because sometimes it'll be vital information. But I already read these questions, so that's why. At the front of the roller coaster, constant rate, so that because it's linear, 8 feet per second, gives the height h in feet, s seconds after the start of the hill. So basically, we have a roller coaster that's 15 feet above the 15 feet above the ground, and it goes to the constant rate of 8 feet per second. So basically, it wants to know what's an equation for this. Well, it starts at 15, so that's the y-intercept here, and the slope is 8s right here. Answer is A. And they're trying to trick you and like numbers like 335 in order to try to like convince you that you missed something in the question and try to like, confuse you that way. Okay, number 5, you have this equation that relates to how much electrician gets hired. You have Miss Sanchez hired him for 2 hours longer. Roland hired than Roland. So basically, in an equation like this, if this is like the cost, then this is the flat rate and this is like the hourly rate. So the flat rate stays the same because both of them hired them, but in the hourly rate that they both paid, like they paid the same hourly rate, but the eventual cost they paid is different because one paid for 2 more hours, so that's 75 per hour. That's 150. So she paid 150 more. Number 6, the circle above has a center 0. The length of arc ADC, that's this arc, is 5 pi, and x equals 100. What is the length of arc ABC? Well, the easy way to do this, in my opinion, is just find the whole circumference and then just subtract that by 5 pi to get this arc. So how I'm going to do this, I'm going to say 360 because that's the total degrees of a circle over 100 because x is 100 equals, I'm going to say y is going to stand for the circumference, and it's going to be over 5 pi. And then you multiply both sides by 5 pi. And if you simplify that out, eventually that will give you 18 pi equals y. But that's the circumference, so do not click C. We will subtract 5 pi from it. Minus 5 pi equals 13 pi. That gives us B. Okay, number 7, if 8 over x equals to 160, what is the value of x? Already from this, since a number is divided by another number, basically if we have a number that's divided by like x, and but the resulting number is greater than the original number, that's when you know x has to be less than 1. So that's how I already know it's going to be D. But even if we just actually solve this, it'd be 8 equals 160x. X is equal to 8 over 160, and that's obviously less than 1, so we know it's D. In the equation above, a is a constant. If no value of x satisfies the equation, what is the value of a? So basically here you know that So basically, what I would first do is I would simplify, like I would make this more simpler. So that would be 2ax minus 15 equals 3x plus 15 plus 5x minus 5. That would give me 2ax minus 15 equals 8x minus 10. So we know that no value of x satisfies this equation. So right here, what would be a value for a where this would not be true? Well, if 2ax equals 8x, then that means this equation cannot be true because you can't have 8x minus 10 is equal to 8x minus 15 because there's no value for x that would work for that. So 2ax equals 8, sorry, or 2a equals 8, a equals 4, and the choice is C. Number 9, a system of 3 equations is graphed on the xy plane above. How many solutions does the system have? That's basically where all 3 graphs intersect, and it's this point, and all 3 of them do intercept at that point. So there's 1, and nowhere else do all 3 intercept. So that's answer choice B. So the equation above is true for all x, where a and b are constants. What is the value of ab? So here, what you basically want to know is this. Basically, you want to make this the left side equal to the right side. So the easiest way, in my opinion, to do this is to just is to think about it. So for 20x cubed, right? So that means 5x squared plus times ax has to equal 20x cubed because there's no other way to get x cubed, right? So that means we know 5a equals 20, a equals 4. And now that we know a equals 4, now we need to solve for b, right? So we know that negative 3bx plus 4ax is equal to negative 2x, is equal to negative 2x. So what we know is negative 3b plus 4a is equal to negative 2. And now since we know a is equal to 4, we know 16 minus 3b equals negative 2. 3b is equal to 18, and b is equal to 6. So now you want to multiply 6 times 4, which gives you 24. Proceed. And if you guys ever come up with like an easier method that I may have overlooked, always you can like message the Google Classroom and leave a comment, because sometimes even I can miss like an easier method to do the question. So which of the following represents all of the possible values of x that satisfy the equation above? Well, the easy way to do this, in my opinion, is just substitute. So I would first substitute for 0 because that would remove 2 of the answer choices. So 0 over 0 minus 3, that's 0. 0 times 2 over anything, that's 0. So that's that. So it has to. It can be, so 0 works. So that means it has to be either A or B. And then so now we just have to either 2 or 4. I'll do 4. 4 over 4 minus 3 is 1, is equal to 2 times 4 is 8 over 2, which is equal to 4. So those two equal each other. So that means it's B. Okay, now let's go for number 12. Which of the following is equivalent to the expression above for x is greater than 0. So for this one, you do 1 over 2x plus 1 is equal to 5, is equal to 5 times 2x plus 1 over 2x plus 1, because you can't add two fractions. Not like there's no equal sign, it's add, my bad, because you can't add two fractions if the like if they don't have a common denominator. So this gives you a common denominator. And if I was to I would like distribute this out. This would give me 10x plus 2 over 2x plus 1. Sorry, my bad. This would give me 10x plus 6 because it's 5 times 1. I see, even I can sometimes make a silly mistake like that, which is why you should always be aware of when you're making silly mistakes. 10x plus 6 over 2x plus 1. And the choice D. And now number 13. The graph of the function f in the xy plane above is a parabola, which the following defines f. I can tell from the way these equations are lined up that it's in vertex form, which means it's x minus h squared plus k, where h is the x coordinate. So it has to be 3. Well, it's like a. It's an a, but a can be any number. So h has to be 3. So that means it's x minus 3. So that means it's not b or d. And then k is 1, so it's positive 1. So it still can be AOC or AOC. So now what I would do is I would take like 2, 5, and I'd plug it into one of them and see if it works. So two actually I'm gonna do 4, 5. You can do either one. I'm gonna do 4, 5. I think it works better. So for A, 4 minus, so that'd be 4 times 4 minus 3 squared plus 1. That gives me 4 times 1 squared, which is 4 plus 1, which equals 5. So that works. So A is the correct answer. And I would also, if you had time, I'd also check for C to make sure C is the wrong, it does not give you the right answer. And if you did, you would get 4 minus 3 is 1 squared plus 1, which is 2, which is not equal to 5. So C is not correct. Now we're almost done with the multiple choice section of the exam. So number 14, in which of the following does the shaded region represent the solution set in the xy plane of the system of inequalities above? First off, the two lines are drawn correctly because it's the same in everything, so that's not something you can cross off immediately. And the easy way to do this is it's y is greater than or equal to x plus 2, so we know so it's shaded this way, and it's less than -6, so at less than 6, that means it's shaded this way, so that gives you that this is the right answer. And also, but that doesn't, sometimes you can be like tricky and you can sometimes get the wrong answer. So another way to make sure that you got the right answer is you see -4 comma 0 is is in the solution set, so just plug in -4 comma 0 and see if it works. So -4 plus 2 is -2, which is less than 0, so that works. And -4 times 2 is -8, which is less than or equal, and plus 3 times 0 is 0. So -8 is less than or equal to 6, so that works out. So that means B is the correct answer. 15, what is the set of all solutions to the equation? Square root of x plus 2 is equal to -x. Well, since it's just a square root and it's equal to -x, we know x has to be a negative number to make this a positive number, because the square root of something can't be a negative number. So that means we already know it can't be C. So what I would do is I would check out, and it can't be A either because 2 is not an solution. So I'll test -1. -1 plus 2, that's 1. Square root of 1 is equal to 1, and -1 is 1, so that works. I'll also write it out for you guys if you need. Plus 2 equal to -1 plus 2 is equal to -1. That's positive 1, and that's square root of 1. That works. So B is the right answer there. Okay, now we're on to the number 16, which is the gridden. Remember, these can't be negative numbers, because if you look at the gridden here, there's no negative place for you to put a negative answer. And you can either put numbers in fraction form or decimal form. That's also another thing you should know. What is the volume in cubic centimeters of a right rectangular prism that has a length of 4 centimeters and a width of 9 centimeters and a height of 10 centimeters? This is just multiplying 4 times 9 times 10, which gives you 360. Also, by the way, just like the multiple choice, here 16 will be easy, but as you go on to like number 20, it'll get harder and harder. So like that's why if you something that helped me when I took like the PSAT is that I was stuck on like number 16. So I thought back and I'm like, wait, this should be a simple problem. So I kept reading the question again. I realized, oh, I was missing something in the question, and that really helped me. So that's something that can help you too. Okay, number 17, 4x plus 2 equals 4. If x satisfies the equation above, what is the value of 2x plus 1? Here, what I would do is, you can either solve for 2, or you can just divide both sides by 2. That gives you 2x plus 1 equals 2. And so you know the answer is 2. This is one of those this is one of those efficiency things where you want to be as efficient as possible so you can make sure you finish in time. Number 18, the figure above shows a complete graph of the function f in the xy plane. The function g, now shown, is defined by g f x equals f of x plus 6. So basically, we're moving this whole graph up by 6. What is the maximum value of the function g? What you do is you find out what the maximum value of the f of x is, and that's right here. That's 2. So if you add 6 to that, that'd be 8. So the maximum is 8. Triangle PQR has the right angle Q. If sine R equals 4 over 5, what is the value of tan P? Well, this is what I would suggest you draw the triangle out to make sure you don't mess it up in your mind. So this is P, Q, R, and this is a right triangle, and sine of R is 4 over 5, so that means sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So this is 4, this is 5, or like it's like a ratio that like it's a multiple of 4. So like if you want, you can say 4x, and this is 5x, and then we want to know what tan P is. That would be an this is 4, this is 5. You can use the Pythagorean theorem, and this would have to be 3. Or you should also know that this is something called a Pythagorean triple, where like 3, 4, 5. I think 5, 12, 13 is another one. Where it's stuff like that where you should have these memorized so that you don't have to like actually solve it out using Pythagorean theorem. So this is like this would be a multiple of 3. So I'm not gonna write the x because I feel like that may just confuse you. This is 4, 5, 3. And then, so now you want to know tan of P, that's opposite over adjacent, that'd be 3 over 4. Or you can do 0.75 if you really want to. Next is 20. The graph of the linear function f is shown in the xy plane above. The graph of the linear function g, not shown, is perpendicular to the graph of f and passes through the point 1, 3. What is the value of g, 0? So we know it passes through this point right here, and if a line that is perpendicular to another one, it has the negative reciprocal of the slope. So let me show you an example of this. So here you want the slope is -2 because in one x value it goes down 2. So we know the slope is -2. So the slope of a perpendicular line of this would be the reciprocal of this, so 1 over -2, but the negative the reciprocal. So it'd be 1 over 2. So the slope is 1 over 2, and it starts here. So if you just do mentally, you would know it would go like this because it's a positive slope. So that means it would go down by 1/2 if you go to 0. So it'd be 2.5 there. So that means at g comma 0, which is the y-intercept, it would be 2.5 or 5 over 2. Either one works. Like I said, for fractions or decimals, you can do either one. So yeah, that's basically this section. Now we're going to have to move on to the next section. Number 1, what value of x satisfies the equation 3x plus 3 equals 27? Well, here you just subtract 3 from both sides. 3x equals 24, and then you divide by 3, x equals 8, simple algebra. Number 2, 2 units of length. I'm just going to brush over these questions because I've already read all of them, and hopefully you guys have done this exam yourself. But when you're actually in the exam, please read the whole question because sometimes you can get important info, but I've already read it, so I already know where the important info is. So 1 cubit is equivalent to 7 palms. It's approximately 140 units long. What's the length? You want the length in palms. So basically you just multiply 140 times 7 and I'll give you 180. Number 3, if 2n over 5 equals 10, multiply 2n minus 1. You multiply both sides by 5 to get 2n equals 50. Then you subtract 1 from both sides because 2n minus 1 equals 49. So it's B. 4, which of the following values of x is not a solution to the equation above? Well, since the square root of an x squared equals x cannot be a negative number because you can't have a square root, it's only be the negative number. That means A cannot be the answer. That's why A is the right answer here. Number 5 and 6 for this graph. A heated cup of coffee is removed from the heat source. So it's 10-minute intervals. Make sure you know what the intervals are. In the of the following, which best approximates the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit of coffee when it's first removed from the heat source? That's at 0 right here. So that's below 200. So I would say around 195, which is that. During which of the following 10-minute intervals does the temperature of the coffee decrease at the greatest average rate? Well, since it's an exponential decay, so like it decreases more at the beginning but less at near the end. That's what you know that the greatest interval will be the first interval, 0 to 10 minutes, and that's answer choice A. 7 in the figure above, AD intersects BE at C. If x equals 100, what is the value of y? Well, if you know this angle has to be 100, 100 plus 20, that's 120, and all the angles have to add up to 180, so this is 60 degrees. And since this is 60, this is also 60 because because any angles that are like opposite like these, where like two lines intersect, both the angle measures the same. 60 plus 4 equals 100, y has to equal 80 so that all the angle measures equal the same. So answer is C. Number 8, the line cab ride Y in a certain center during non-peak hours based on the number of miles traveled X. So this is the graph. According to the graph, what is the cost of each additional mile traveled in dollars of a cab ride? That's basically the slope. So the easy way to do this would be to take 2 points, like this and this. And if you see this is 1 and this is 3, so it takes 1, it goes up 2 after 1x. So that's a $2 slope. So answer is A. On Tuesday, the local gas station had 135 customers. The table above summarizes. This is like a table probability question. Based on data on the table was probably the gas station customers selected random amount of day did not purchase gasoline. So that means we're doing it out of 135 and did not purchase gasoline. That's 50. So it's 50 over 135. That's answer choice D. Washington High School randomly selects freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior students to a survey. So 1/4 were freshmen, 1/3 were sophomore, half of the remaining were juniors. If 336, in my opinion, the easy way to do this is just plug into your calculator 336 minus 336 times 1/4 minus 336 times 1/3, and then you get the remaining, and then you get to divide that by 2 because half the remaining are juniors. And eventually that's how many seniors you have. And if you plug that into your calculator properly, you would get answer choice D. So remember, it's half of the remaining. So it's not 1/2 are juniors, it's half of the remaining after you subtract the 1/4 and 1/3. Number 11, the planet is 20 centimeters tall. Planet B is 12 centimeters. The ratio of A to B is equal to C to D. C is 54. So that means 12 over 20 equals x over 54. If you wanted, like, at first it would be 20 over 12 equals 54 over x, but it's flipped. But you can flip both equations to make so it's easy to solve for x. Then you just multiply both sides by 54, and then you plug that into your calculator, and you get answer choice A. Remember, this is the calculator section, which is why a calculator is important. It saves you a lot of time. Biologists found a new species of pill shrimp at the world's deepest undersea vent. The BB vent field. The vent is 2.1 miles below the sea surface. Approximately how many kilometers below the sea surface is the vent? Here's what, for unit questions like these, I would use dimensional analysis to make sure that your units are correct. So what that means is you'd be 3.1 miles over 1, and you went to kilometers, and 1 kilometer equals 0.66214 miles. And so you want to cross off the miles. So that means you put 0.614 miles, and this is 1 kilometer. So the miles here cancel out because it's on the top and the bottom. So that all you do is left with kilometers. So you multiply this out, and eventually you'll get answer choice D. Number 13, a cargo helicopter delivers 100-pound packages and 120-pound packages. For each delivery trip, the helicopter must carry at least 10 packages. Total weight is 110. It can at most be, and the maximum number is of what you want the maximum number, and you need at least 10 packages. So it's just a simple system of equations question. What I personally would do is I would just start out. I would just start from the bottom 6 and go work your way down. Like start from the highest number and work your way to the lowest number, and just plug it in and see if it works. I feel like that's just the easy way to make sure that you don't make any stupid mistake. So just do 6 times 120, and so that would be whatever that is, plus 100 times 4, because you need at least 10 packages, and that would give you, and the answer would be above 110, 1,100. So now, so you know it's on D. Now you move on to 5. So you plug it in. So 5 times 120 plus, since you did 5, you need 5 more packages. 5 times 100. And if you did that, it would not be over 1,100. That's why answer choice C is the right answer. And even A and B would technically work, but you want the maximum number. So 5 is greater than 4 and 2, obviously. So that's why 5 is the right answer there. Number 14, a company purchased a machine valued at 120,000. Divided, the machine depreciates. That means it goes down every year. After 10 years, the value will be 30,000. So that means after 10 years, it became 30,000. So the 120,000 minus 30,000, that's 90,000. So that means it went down 9,000 every year. So which of the following gives the value T years after it was purchased for the thing. So it starts off at 120, so it's not it's not A, and it goes down because we know it's depreciation, right? So it's not C, and we know it goes down by 9,000, not 30,000, because it ends up at 30,000 after 10 years, but it goes down by 9,000 every year. That's why answer choice B is the correct answer. Now 15, line M contains the points 0, 2, 4, and 0, 1, which of the following is the equation for line M? Well, it's going to be, we already know that the y-intercept is 0, 1, which means that if we're doing y equals mx plus b, which all of these equations are in, that means b has to equal 1, and the only one where b equals 1 is d, so it's d. These are like simple like efficiency tips where like you could just solve it, like just solve for the whole equation, but since you already know that the y-intercept has to be 1, d is the only plausible response. Number 16, in the equation above, a is a constant if the equation is equivalent to b of x, b times x, where b is a constant. What is the value of b? Well, so basically what this means is this whole equation has to equal b of x, which, so what that means is that means the x squared plus like the constants have to cancel out. So what I would do is so that means I know 4x times a of x has to equal 1. Equal 1x squared. So that means 4a equals 1, a equals 1/4. And then I also know that, and that makes sense. And also the 4 will cancel out because 4 times -1 is -4, plus 4, that cancels out. So now I have left of b of x. How would I get b of x? It's a of x times 4 times 4x times -1. So that's -4x plus a of x is 1. So that's 4. That's x. So that means it's -3x. And that's b. That's b times x. So that means b is equal to -3. So yeah, so like how I basically got this is I knew that this has to equal this, which means the x squared have to cancel out. So in order for the x squares to cancel out, if 4 times a has to equal 1, because that means it would be x squared minus x squared, which is cancel out. So that means 4 equals 1, a equals 1/4. And after that, I knew that 4 times a of x times -1 times 4 of x, that's just FOIL, has to equal b of x. So and since I know what a of x is, I just solved for that, and eventually I got -4x plus x equals b of x, and -3x equals b of x, and b equals -3. 17. If 2w plus 4t equals 4t and 4w plus 5t equals 25, what is the value of 2w plus 3t? What I did here is I added these two equations. So that would be 2w plus 4t equals 14 plus 4w plus 5t equals 25. That gave me 6w plus 9t equals 39. And if you divide both sides by 3, you would get 2w plus 3t. So I divide both sides by 2, that I get 2w plus 3t. Divide both sides by 3, and that gives me equals 13. Answer is C. Okay, now on 18 to 20. Number 18, if P% of an adult's yearly allowance, oh yeah, suppose we have this, like, Jennifer bought a bunch of country grain cereal, never heard of that in my life. The nutrition facts of the box state that a serving size of a cereal is 3/4 cup and provides 210 calories, 50 of from fat. In addition, each serving of the cereal provides 180 milligrams of potassium, which is 5% of daily allowance for adults. If P% of the adult's daily allowance of potassium is provided by X servings of crunchy grain cereal each day per day, which are the following expression P in terms of X. If you want to check, the easy way to do this is one serving, which is X, it would give you 5%. So you have to make sure that you need to choose one where one would give you 5. So here one, that would give me 0.5. Here one would give me 5. That could be true. Here one would give me 0.05. That's not true because P is in percent, so it's P%. So short, like it would be 0.05, but you want percent, so that's 5%. So you want 5. And here, that would be 1.05%. That's not true, so it's B. 19, on Tuesday, Jennifer will mix country grain cereal with super grain cereal, another one I've never heard of. Super grain cereal provides 240 calories per cup. If the total number of calories in 1 cup of Jennifer's mixture is 270, how much super grain cereal is in 1 cup of the mixture? So she's mixing both of these cereals combined. So we know 3/4 cup it provides 210 calories. So what I personally would do is that I would see how much 1 cup provides, so I know they're both in like equal like measurements. So what I would do is 210 times 4 over 3, and that would give me. So let me get my calculator out. That would give me 280. And now I know that 280 and 240. I combine 280 and 240 per cup in order to get 270. So 270 is obviously closer to 280, which means it has to be more. That means the super grain cereal is less than, like, it's less than 1/2. So that means that it can be D. And if you look at it, it's 280 is 10 higher than 270, but 240 is 30 less than 270, which means this means she put more of this cereal. So that means and if you like do a ratio, you would figure out that it was 1/4 cup the the old cereal. And then to check your answer, what you could do is you can do 1/4 times 240 plus 3/4 times 210. And if you did that, you would get 280. My bad. And if you did and you multiplied this, if you added these two, you would get 270. So you can check your answer that way. So like even if you didn't know how to solve this question, you could just there's only 4 answers possible, right? So you can just guess and check those 4. Okay, number 20. Which of the following could be the graph of the number of calories from fat and crunchy grain cereal as a function of a number of 3/4 cup servings in the cereal? So as servings go up, how many calories will go up? Sadly, as servings go up, calories do not stay constant, nor do they go down. I wish they went down, but sadly they do not. So we know it has to be either A or B. However, so if you think about it logically, if you have zero number here, even if you have 0 cups of 0 servings, you still get fat. Luckily, you don't get fat from not eating something. You get fat from eating it. So that's why at 0, you would get zero. You have 0 calories from fat. So that's why A is the right answer here. Number 21, the graph of the exponential function h in the xy plane where y equals h of x. H, yeah, has a y-intercept of d, where d is a positive constant, which the following could define the function f, h. So basically, you want h and d is a positive constant. So what that means is that d is something that won't change. And also, you know that y-intercept of d. So what that means is if you plug in 0 for x, y would have to equal d. So you just plug in 0 for x for all these and see for which one this y equal d. Here, d to the power of 0, that would give me 1. So that would be -3, and that's not d. Here it would be 3 times x times d. If x was 0, that would be 3 times 0 times d, which is 0. B, d times -2x to the third power. If that was 0, then that would be 0 to the third power, which is 0 times d, which is 0 again. But here it's 3 to the 0 power, which equals 1 times d. So 1 times d equals d. So that's why y would equal d when x equals 0, which means it's a y-intercept. So that's why d is the right answer. 22, the weight in pounds for 15 horses in the stable were reported. The mean, median, and range and standard deviation of the data were found. The horse with the lowest reported weight was found to weigh 10 pounds less, while value remains unchanged. So, if one of the horses weighs less, the mean will change because the mean will become lower because like you're skewing one data point to the left to less. The median, it won't change because the median is just which data point is in the middle, and since the lowest point will still be the lowest point, your middle data point will still be the same. Range will change because the range is from the lowest point to the highest point, and standard deviation will change. So there's a U.S. cable news show. The host has a poll. Do you support the new federal policy discussed during the show? 28 responded yes. 70 responded no. Which of the following best explains the results are unlikely to represent the sentiments of the population in the U.S.? So like sort of like why does it represent the whole? The percentages do not add up to 100,000. The percentages cannot add up to 100,000 because sometimes you can have people who say I have no opinion, that kind of things. That's why that's okay. B, those responding to the poll would not have random sample of the population in the U.S. That seems okay, so I'm not going to cross it off yet. They would not 50% yes responses and 50% no responses. Obviously, there's some issues with the country's not exactly 50-50 on it, so it doesn't have to be 50-50, so that's why C is wrong. The show did not allow viewers enough time to respond to the poll, and I don't really think that's as bad. Why B is the correct answer is this is one U.S. cable news show, and you don't know that the audience represents the whole U.S. population. Like if they, like for example, think about this logically. If you ask CNN's audience if they supported Trump's policy, it would probably be most would say no. But if you ask Fox News viewers if they supported Trump policies, it would probably be majority would say yes. So that's why you don't know like the political leanings of the show, and so like the viewership of a show does not represent the total population of America. That's why B is the right answer of why the survey is wrong. 24, if f of x equals 5x squared minus 3 and f of a plus x plus a equals 5x squared plus 30x plus 42, what is the value of a? Here I will just plug in 5 times x plus a squared minus 3, and then I would do 5 times x squared plus 2xa plus a squared minus 3. So what we know here is 5 5a squared, and this whole thing is equal to this. So we know 5 times a squared minus 3 would be a constant number, and the one constant is 42. And so that means we know 5a squared minus 3 has to equal 42. And then you would add 3 to both sides. 5a squared equals 45. Divided by 5, a squared equals 9. Square root of both sides, a equals 3. And choice C. Okay, number 25 now. Close to being done. If sine x equals a, which of the following must be true for the vowel values of x? Like I said, I think it's 2 tests ago where I said this, where you should always know if sine x equals a, then cosine 90 minus x equals a. So that's something you should always know. The sine of an angle and the cosine of 90 degrees minus that angle is equals the same. So that's why that's C. So that's why C is the right answer there. That's the theorem that's always true, and you should always know in the back of your mind. So you have this, which represents the height above the ground, x seconds after it's been launched vertically. If y equals h of x, graph on the xy plane, which is meaning of the positive x-intercept of the graph. So let's like sketch this graph out. So we have a projectile that starts from here. It goes like this. It starts here, it goes like this, and hits the ground. So this x-intercept is where the projectile hits the ground because the height will equal 0. And as you know, the height equals 0, that means you're at the ground. So that means it's where it reaches the minimum the ground, and that's answer is D. When the projectile reaches the maximum height, that would be the vertex. The maximum height of the projectile, that again would be the maximum height would be the y value of the vertex, and the time at which it reaches the maximum height would be the x value, and the initial height of the projectile, that would be the y-intercept. In the xy plane, the graph of the polynomial function f crosses the x-axis at exactly 2 points, where x and a and b are both positive, which of the following could define f. As you guys know, if you want to like x-intercept form, it would be x minus a. Sorry, this writing's a little bit laggy right now. I don't know why. Minus times x minus b, and that's answer choice A. So we know it can be B or C. And the reason why it can't be D is because since there's an extra X here, that means that means it would also cross the X axis at 0, 0. And that's not, it only crosses at 2 points. That's why D is wrong. 28, if y equals 3x squared minus 3 is graphed on the xy plane of the graph is displayed as the constant or coefficient in the equation. So it's basically saying which of these is the constant, and hopefully you guys all know that that the y-intercept is always the constant in the equation like this, which is the 2. So the y-intercept, this equation is in standard form, not x-intercept form, so that's why it's not a constant in here. And it's not in vertex form, so that's why it's not a constant here. And the x-intercept of the line of symmetry, again, it's not in vertex form. So that's why it has to be answer C. Number 29, we have a scatter plot. It's federally mandated minimum wage every 10 years between 1940 to 2010. Line of best fit, the equation is this. What is the line of best fit predicted by the increase in the minimum wage over a 70-year period? So basically, it's saying that if X is every year that it increases, not every 10 years. So every year it increases by 0.096, and that's answer choice A. The trap question is C, because they want you to think, hey, X is equal to every 10 year, but that's just the interval. The actual equation is every year. X equals every year. Okay, number 30, the scatter plot above shows the company's ice cream sales D in dollars and high temperature T in degrees Celsius on 12 different days. A line of best fit of the data is also shown, which is the following could be equations for the line of best fit. So here, where they're trying to trick you, you should always be aware of where the graph starts. Here it starts at x equals 10. So like if you continue the graph, this would not be the y-intercept because that's not the y-axis. The y-axis would be somewhere like around here. So that's something to be aware. So that's why you can first off you can cross off any that would be the x-intercept would be something would be right there. So it can be A or B. So now we know it's either C or D. Now what I would suggest is the easiest thing to do is just to approximate like the slope of the graph. Try to approximate the slope of the graph, and then using that try to think back to like what the x-intercept would be. So what I would think would be the easiest way to do this is like if I kind of extend this to 10 and go all the way to 20, because that's a 10-year period, and if you want the y-intercept, that would have to be another 10-year period. So, oh yeah, basically, I'm just since I know that I realized that the y-intercept is going to decide what the equation of the graph is going to be. So that's why I'm trying to decide what the y-intercept is, so I know which one of these is true, because the slope of both lines is the same. So I find what I would do is I would find I would find the difference between 0 and 20, and I would say that would be around like 350. So if you say it goes down around 350 again, that would be around 50 to like 100, and that's 84. That's why D is the right answer there. Again, if there's any of these that you don't get and you want help on, you could email one of us, or you can message the messenger group, or you can leave a comment with Classroom, and we can give you further explanation. Number 31, in the xy plane above, this circle has center HK, and the radius equal 10. What is the value of K? So here, what you would do is you first want to find what H equals. So you know H would equal the mean of both of these points because it's right in the middle. So that means H would have to equal the mean of 412. So that would be 12. So you know H equals 12. So now let me just put that right here. So now you want to write the equation of a circle. That is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Now I fill in what I know. I'm gonna use 4 comma 0 as one of my points. So this is gonna be 4 minus 12 squared plus y minus sorry plus 0 minus k squared equals r squared. This would be 64 plus k squared equals 100. K squared equals 36, and k equals plus or minus 6. but it has to be positive 6 because the circle is in the first quadrant. So the answer is 6 for that one. Number 32, in the xy plane, the line L has a y-intercept of negative 13 and is perpendicular to the line with the equation y equals negative 2/3 x. If the point 10b is on line L, what is the value of b? What I would do here is, because remember I said if you have a perpendicular line, what that means is the slope is the negative reciprocal. So the slope would be 3/2 because it's you take the negative and negative, that would be positive, and you flip you take the reciprocal of the fraction. So the slope is 3/2x, and the y-intercept is negative 13. I just plug in 10 right here. 3/2 times 10, which is 15 minus 13, and that would equal. And if you use the calculator or you can use your head, that equals 2. Here, human is blood, blah blah blah. The table above shows the distribution of blood type and the rhesus factor. If one of these people who is a rhesus negative is chosen at random, so it's one of these, it's one of like this column. So we're looking at this column right here. The probability the person is blood type B is 1/9. So B is 1/9. So that means 2 over. We don't know how many rhesus factors there are because we don't know X. But let's just say let's call that Y equals 1/9. And if you do the math, because it has to be equivalent fraction, Y would equal 18 because 2/18 is equal to 1/9. So we know that total is 18. So if you want to solve for X, we just do 18 minus 7 minus 2 minus 1, and that'd be 18 minus 10, which is equal to 8. So X equals 8. Let me just write out the thing. So if you guys, to make sure you guys know what I did. So I did 18 minus 7 minus 2 minus 1 equals X. Okay, number 24. Based on the graph above, how many of the games played did the soccer team score goals equal to the median number of the goals for the 29 games? This sort of is something that you'll see across often in the SAT, where like they give you a graph and they want you to find the median that way. So basically, how you would do this is you take 29, you divide it by 2. So 29 divided by 2 is equal to 14.5. And then if it's like a 0.5 number, you would do like you would minus 0.5, or you would, so that would give you, so you would add 0.5. So you want the 15th number. So so now what you would do is you start at 1 and you'd keep adding until you get to 15. Okay, so first you have 8 plus 9. That's past 15. So what I know is 2 is the median. And it's asking how many how many of the median goals are there. So there's 9. So that means it's 9. The answer is 9 here. Yeah, so if I want to know how many medium is, I take the total number, I divide it by 2, and if it's an odd number, then I would divide it. Once I divide it by 2, I would think, what's it called? I would add 0.5, and it's that number that I want to get to, like when I start adding that way. Gisela would owe 15,500 in taxes each year if she were not eligible for tax deduction. This year, she used tax deduction that reduced the rate that she owes by 2,000. She got 2,000 tax reduction, and the tax reduction reduces the tax loading reduces by D%. What is the value of D? Here, this is actually pretty simple. D would just equal 2,325 over 15,500. That's a reduction. And if you want to learn more about percentages, you can watch the last math video. That's a plug right there, and that would give you 0.15. And since we want it in percent, it'd be 15%. So D equals 15. 36. We have two equations. The similar equation has no solution. If A and B are constant, what is the value of A and B? So that means we know it has no solutions. So if it has no solutions, that means A is equal to 3/4 and B is equal to 1/2. Why? Because think about it logically. 3/4 x minus 1/2 y equals 12, and 3/4 x minus 1/2 y equals 12 equals 8 and 9. That means these two equations cannot have similar solution, because there's no way you're gonna get value for x and y that's gonna equal that, because what that would basically mean is 12 would have to equal 9, and 12 is not equal to 9. So that means that A is equal to 3/4 and B equal to a negative 1/2. So I just did that. Basically, I just copied whatever this was and this was for the b value. And now, so what is the value of a over b? So that would just be 3 over 4 divided by 1 over 2. So you'd multiply it by the reciprocal times 2 over 1. That equals 6 over 4, which is equal to 3 over 2. Okay, we have this tourist arrivals. Based on the information given in the table, how much greater in millions was the median number of tourists tracked from the top 9 tourists in 2019 to the median number in 2019? So first we want to find the median number. So obviously you just you just try to find the median. And if you look, and the median in both of these years is Italy at, so we find the distance in millions, and it is already in millions. So 47.7 minus 46.44 is 1.3. So the answer is 1.3. And the number of international tourist arrivals in Russia in 2012 was 13.5% greater than 2011. So that means you have the 2011 one times 1.135 is equal to 2012. So the number, okay, when I write 2011 or 2012, I mean like whatever represents 2011. So I'm gonna write a variable there, so it's not confusing. So y equals 2012, like the year, like whatever the data was the year 2012, and x is equal to whatever the data was in 2011. So now I just want to solve for x, but I know what y is because I know what 2012 is. So I know 1.135x is equal to 46.4. Now I divide both sides by 1.135. So you do 46.4 divided by 1.135. You get 40.88. Oh wait, sorry, I was using the wrong y value. My bad. That's why I was like, why is it correctly? My bad. I was looking at Italy for some reason. I thought you should always be aware. You're talking about Russia here. So that means the 2012 value is 24.7. See, even I just made a silly mistake here when I was teaching it, doing it again. That's why you should always be aware of silly mistakes you may be making. So here it'd be 1.135 x is equal to 24.7. And now you would do 24.7 divided by 1.135. And it wants and that would be like 21.99. And it wants in the nearest integer. So that means it would be 22 million. But it's something how many more million more. Yes, sorry, I mean the boxed answer. So it's 22 million in it's 22 million in 2011. But you don't just box at 22 and say that's the answer because the question is asking how many million more in 2012 than 2011. So that means you would do, so you know it was 24.7. So 24.7 minus 22. So if you did that, it would be 2.7. And that would round it up to the nearest integer is 3.